Live stream now. All right. I will now call to order the special city council meeting of June 1st, 2020. Due to the COVID-19 pandemic, this meeting is being held electronically, and members of the council are participating remotely pursuant to the council's electronic participation policy and to practice social distancing. Public access to the meeting is available on the local government access channel 8 for Comcast and Xfinity subscribers and on the city's YouTube channel. Public access is also available by telephone by utilizing the call-in numbers posted on the meeting agenda. All callers will be muted and may only comment during the time allotted for public comment as indicated on the agenda. Thank you all for following these directions and for maintaining meeting decorum tonight. Joanna, will you call the roll, please?
Mayor Leidy.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Wilford.
Here.
Councilmember Witkovich.
Here.
Councilmember Peterson.
Here.
Councilmember Downing.
Here.
Councilmember Brown.
Here.
Councilmember Goff.
Here.
Councilmember Duran Mollica.
Here.
Councilmember Escobar.
Here.
Excellent. So Councilmember Mollica is joining us. She's on the phone tonight. So welcome. So we are going to, I'm going to share my screen and we will have the Pledge of Allegiance. If I can find it. Hold on. Does everyone see the flag?
Yes.
Okay. Please stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag
to the flag of the United States
of America
and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God,
indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I got tripped up. There was an echo.
Yeah, I heard it too. You're okay.
Sorry,
it sounded better like that.
All righty. So, public invited to be heard. Joanna, do we have any comments submitted prior to tonight's meeting?
I did not receive any comments, and I don't see any members of the public on the phone line either.
Meredith, are we doing the study session first or the regular meeting? I'm sorry.
Special city council meeting is first.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. So we have no public invited to be heard. So we will jump into ordinances. This is an emergency ordinance, CB 1946. Joanna, will you read the title?
A bill for an emergency ordinance amending section 18-2-4 by the addition thereto of a new subsection C of the City of Northglenn Municipal Code to authorize the administrative approval of applications for the modification of liquor licensed premises.
Move for approval. Second.
Thank you. City Manager Geyer, will you give us a summary, please?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. What I'm going to do is give an overarching overview to the three items that consist of our agenda this evening. And then I'll turn it over to Joanna, our city clerk, who can speak specifically to CB 1946, as well as CR 94. And then Brooke, our planning director, will speak to CR 95. So these three items on the agenda before you this evening are in response to the governor's request and guidance for reopening restaurants and food services. The administrative approvals are being requested in order to provide a streamlined and expedited process for our restaurants here in Northglenn. Our goal with this approach is to help our restaurants reopen quickly, and we believe that we can accomplish this through the process that we've laid out before you and the requested administrative approvals. Additionally, I want to draw attention to the fact that staff has built in fee waivers as well as reimbursement of fees. And Brooke and Joanna can talk about the specifics related to those pieces. But I would say this is an additional extra step that we built in when we had a conversation at the staff level about what we can do to lessen the burden and hardship that many of our restaurants have experienced during our COVID-19 response. So with that, I'll turn it over to Joanna to speak to CB 1946.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. So as the City Manager stated, CB 1946 is an emergency ordinance regarding the administrative approval of temporary modification of premises applications. As I'm sure you're aware, restaurants were allowed to open last Wednesday with limited in-person dining. They're required to reduce their seating capacity by 50% or a maximum of 50 people, whichever is less. And because the indoor in-person seating capacity is limited, it has really been encouraged for restaurants to utilize outdoor spaces so that they have more accommodations to properly social distance between parties and between tables. So currently, establishments that are seeking to utilize outdoor spaces, they're required to obtain what's called a temporary use permit from the Planning and Development Department, which Brooke will address later. And those establishments that hold an on-premise liquor license are also required to submit what's called a temporary modification of premises application. So the temporary modification of premises application for liquor licensees, that's actually a dual license process between the local liquor licensing authority and the state licensing authority. So it takes a slightly different process, but in with the governor's orders and the public health orders to allow restaurants to reopen, the Colorado Liquor Enforcement Division has adopted an emergency regulation, and information about that is included in the staff memo. A really quick summary of that emergency rule is that it allows for the concurrent review of the temporary modification of premises applications, and that's in order to shorten the time required to go through both the local and the state levels so that they can get the applications approved quicker and get the restaurants open sooner. It reduces the state application fee from $300 to $150. There's currently no city fee for a temporary modification of premises application. It does include all of the same requirements. So licensees are still required to submit information to show that they have control of the premises, to show the ingress, egress, how they'll control the alcohol beverages so they're not taken off the premises easily. So all of those requirements still stand. So the main thing that this emergency ordinance addresses is the timing piece. Currently, the city clerk can approve other types of applications administratively, such as annual renewals or transfers of ownership. Right now, the Liquor Licensing Authority approves the modification of premises applications. So this ordinance would allow the city clerk to now approve those modification of premises applications related to the COVID-19 and trying to utilize that outdoor space to get restaurants open again. I can tell you the local liquor licensing authority had a meeting this morning, and so they reviewed the proposed ordinance and they passed a motion to unanimously approve, recommending city council approval of the emergency ordinance as drafted. So they have had a chance to weigh in on the change in approval structure, and they recommended approval of the ordinance. And I'd be happy to answer any questions about this piece, if there are any.
Councilmember Brown.
New computer. How are we going to enforce this? What is our plan? Does Chief have a laid out plan on how he's going to enforce that alcohol isn't going out? The first one that comes to my mind, Joyce, is Cheers. Are we just going to leave it to the businesses to monitor? I understand we don't have police officers to sit at every restaurant that does this, but I do have a deep concern about alcohol being served outside if they don't have a designated patio area. And I know we're talking about going forward instead of, because they don't have backs.
So with the modification, they will have a designated area. It must be marked. It must have I don't want to say a permanent boundary, but an approved boundary. So whether that's, the city will have some say on that. It can't be a chalk line on the ground. It has to be substantial. It has to really show the control and the boundary for that additional area. We do have a lot of businesses that currently have outdoor seating in the form of patios already. And so they might want to just expand that patio space. So the enforcement will really remain the same. Any modification that we do to a liquor licensed establishment, will be provided to the police department so that they have an idea of where patrons should be. And so in that, we also ask for the patrons' help with that. If they observe, what they would perceive to be liquor violations at a business, we would hope that they would call the police department and report that. The liquor violations will be processed the same way as they currently are. So we do have the ability, if there are violations, that we could revoke this permit because it is a temporary permit to utilize that extra area. So we have the ability to revoke that. And then if patrons observe what they would perceive to be, not compliance with the social distancing piece, they think the tables are too close or people are mingling and things like that. We really need them to forward those concerns to the Tri-County Health Department so that they can follow up on that as well, because that does risk the restaurant's food service license as well.
Can I ask you one more question and then I'll let others talk? There's that area that they have designated. Like I'm totally thinking of Cheers and some of the other bars that we have, like the Glen and stuff. There's an area that they have designated for smoking, right? So does this push that area out further? When they come out into the parking lot, does it become a non-smoking area? What happens with that?
So the different restaurants or on-premise liquor licensed establishments will need to submit to the city what their plan is. This in no way automatically extends anybody's premises. And there will be, I would imagine, some restaurants who don't need to expand because they've already got the licensed outdoor area, or they think that their reduced indoor capacity is sufficient for right now. So it in no way automatically extends anybody's outdoor area. They would have to determine the exact area that they want to use, because they're going to have to account for parking if they, want to expand out into a parking lot. So they'll need to tell the city exactly what area they want to use, and then the city will approve that based on our requirements.
I think maybe I said my question wrong. I apologize. The area that they already have designated for non-smoking, because you can't smoke, I don't know how many feet in front of a door or whatever. So everybody has their little areas off to the side, where everybody knows where to go to smoke. My question to you is, when Robert opens up, he did open on Friday, is he going to be able to have his outside bar restaurant area, and then the people are going to be able to smoke, say, in the middle of the parking lot by DMV or something over there? I'm exaggerating, but the far end of Walmart or Walgreens, are we going to, I know that's not really something that we enforce, but I just wondering how we're going to handle that. Yeah. Because I'll take it offline. I just worry. Well,
and I'm sure Corey remembers the smoking ordinance off the top of his head. I don't have that right now. But as far as, the 15 feet or whatever it is from the entrance, their entrance will still be their entrance. I'm just not sure how that applies to like the boundary of a patio, but Corey might be able to answer that one.
Yeah, Councilmember Brown, this will modify or could modify outdoor premise, but smoking is allowed outside. Right. So it wouldn't necessarily modify their smoking area at all. It'll just depend. What Joanna said is absolutely correct. They're going to submit a plan. We're going to review it. Presumably that plan will show whether they needed to move their smoking area. But frankly, I think it's unlikely, because what we're doing is adding outdoor space where they're allowed to smoke already, not indoor.
Okay, thank you. I understand that now. So basically, when he puts tables out there, or any bar puts tables out there, that becomes a smoking zone.
It
25
could.
feet. Yeah.
It could, because the bar might choose to make it no smoking.
Can a bar have live music in the bar? As long as patrons aren't in there, or is there no live music at this time, or do you know anything like that?
I don't know that that's been included in the guidance. It's certainly well beyond what we're proposing tonight.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Councilmember Goff.
Thank you, Mayor. My question is, I know I looked over all the documents for tonight. I'm not sure if I can remember everything, but my question has to do with the reimbursing the state fee, in that it's eligible for CARES Act. Was that included in the PowerPoint that's going to come later, talking about our whatever items that we might be using the CARES funding for, or is that going to be in addition to what we discuss later?
This is Heather. That would be in addition to what we discussed this evening, because it'd be contingent upon council passing the emergency ordinance and the 2 resolutions this evening.
And then do we have any idea, I guess we probably just don't have any idea how many of these locations restaurants and whatever taverns might want to take advantage of this? Has people contacted you already? Do we have any sense at all?
I believe, Joanna, you can jump in here after I share this perspective. Debbie has received interest from restaurant owners. So while I can't say we've had X number of contacts and we believe we'll get X volume of interest, there is interest.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay. Joanna, will you call the vote, please?
Mayor Leidy,
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Wolford,
Yes.
Councilmember Whitkovich,
Yes.
Councilmember Peterson,
Yes.
Councilmember Downing,
Yes.
Councilmember Brown,
Again, new computer. Yes.
Councilmember Goff,
Yes.
Councilmember Duran Malika,
Yes.
Councilmember Escabel.
Yes.
I'll close that vote, and CB 1946 passes unanimously.
Great. Okay, so now we are on resolution CR 94. Joanna, will you read the title?
A resolution delegating certain authority to the city manager and authorizing certain fee waivers to implement temporary modifications of liquor licensed premises in response to the COVID-19 pandemic.
Move for approval.
Second.
Second.
Thank you. Is there anything to add for this topic? I know we covered some of it recently. Heather, do you have anything to add to this one?
I do not.
Okay. Does anyone have any questions about this one? Joanna, is there something different that we should call out?
Just to be absolutely clear, I'll just go over the 3 pieces of it very quickly.
Okay.
The first section authorizes the city manager to enter into temporary license agreements, and that would be used if an expansion would include public property. It waives the $100 temporary use permit fee associated with new outdoor modifications of premises. And then it also directs staff to reimburse that $150 fee to licensees who obtain that local and state approval through the State Liquor Licensing Authority. So it would authorize those three actions.
Councilmember Brown?
Sorry, Mayor. Joanna, public property. I guess I didn't catch that right off the bat. If they're expanding out into public property, it's the same rules. And do they have to come before the city and get special approval to move out into public property?
So the special approval would be in the form of that license agreement.
Okay.
So staff would obviously make sure that, use of that property could still be done safely, could still be done with the markings to identify the expanded boundaries. And then the city manager would have the authority to go ahead and enter into that license agreement with the business. And you'll see this language in the next resolution as well. Okay. The one difference between the liquor licensed expansions and the non-liquor licensed expansions is that for an on-premises liquor license, any property that they want to expand onto must be contiguous or adjacent to the currently licensed property. So it'll be right next to that. Whereas with a non-liquor licensed business, it could be apart from their current premises.
And they have to gain the property owner's permission on if it's okay.
They do. Yep. They'll need to have possession or control of the premises. Yep.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Seeing no further questions, Joanna, will you call the vote, please?
Mayor Leidy?
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Wilford?
Yes.
Councilmember Whitkovich?
Yes.
Councilmember Peterson?
Yes.
Councilmember Downing?
Yes.
Councilmember Brown?
Yes.
Councilmember Goff?
Yes.
Councilmember Duran-Malika?
Yes.
Councilmember Escabel?
Yes.
So I'll close that vote, and CR 94 passes unanimously.
Excellent. CR 95, Joanna, will you read the title?
A resolution delegating certain authority to the city manager and authorizing certain fee waivers to implement temporary modifications to restaurants without a liquor license and other retail businesses in response to the COVID-19 pandemic.
Motion to approve.
Second.
Okay, so Brooke Savoda, Director of Planning and Development, is here to provide a summary of this item.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. I'll keep this brief as I think both Joanna and Heather have kind of covered a lot of the main points. I will mention that staff has been working with the Development Review Committee, which includes Fire and Building Department, to sort of modify our temporary use permit application so that we are more specific to this type of request, because temporary use permits are not just limited to outdoor uses. But we've been working on this for the last couple of weeks, putting this together. We actually already have the application online. We have not done the push yet for it, but to the concerns that were raised earlier, we're going to require a site plan that's going to identify location, parking, pedestrian safety, fire issues in terms of life safety and whatnot. So overall, the concerns that were brought up earlier, we will be addressing through the temporary use permitting process. Also, and Debbie may want to chime in on this, but this Thursday, we're doing an online seminar about how they can go about doing this. And we're ramping our staff up to take in the applications as we anticipate that there will be a lot of folks trying to take advantage of this opportunity. Lastly, what I'll also point out is that we've had commercial properties that have multiple retail and food services also reach out to us and try to collectively put together a request. And we are open to that as well, as it will make it easier for us to manage and administer the overall layout plan, that we don't have potential conflicts. And so we'll be looking at it both ways, as on an individual basis. And if there's a collective way, we'll definitely encourage that, as well as it'll make it much easier for us to be able to review and administer those applications. And this is a staff review, so it will not require public approval in order to expedite it. And as mentioned earlier, the temporary use permit fees will be waived.
questions from council? Okay, thank you so much. Joanna, will you call the vote, please?
Mayor Leidy,
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Wilford,
Yes.
Councilmember Witkovich,
Yes.
Councilmember Peterson,
Yes.
Councilmember Downing,
Yes.
Councilmember Brown,
Yes.
Councilmember Goff,
Yes.
Councilmember Duran Malika,
Yes.
Councilmember Escabel.
Yes.
We'll close that vote, and CR 95 passes unanimously.
Thank you very much. So there is no further business for this special meeting. So we are adjourned. We're going to move into study session, and all council members are still present, so we do not need to take roll again. We're going to move into the draft Colorado Communities for Climate Action policy statement. So Becky Smith is here to introduce this item. Welcome, Becky.
Hi, thank you, Mayor, Council. Becky Smith here, Planning Manager, to introduce the CC4CA draft policy agenda. Just a brief overview of what CC4CA is for especially new council members. It's a coalition of 34 local governments across Colorado that are advocating for stronger state and federal climate policy. The city joined CC4CA in 2018. Every year, CC4CA holds an annual retreat where the collective of all voting members of our coalition, so for the city of Northglenn, Jenny Wilford was appointed as our voting member, get together, they discuss the policy agenda, and then they must unanimously vote on it for that to be the policy agenda moving forward. The policy agenda really enables the staff at CC4CA to look at what legislation is moving forward and what opportunities come up that they can step in and really advocate for legislation to be enacted as it relates to climate change and sustainability. Really, the biggest change this year in the policy agenda is a new policy that's being proposed, which is to encourage the widespread adoption of telecommuting options and other climate protective, sorry, can't read my own writing, so let me just pull it up. So climate positive innovations drawing from lessons learned during the coronavirus pandemic to substantially reduce transportation-related air and carbon pollution. There were also other changes noted in the policy agenda, but it was mostly to clean up or really hone in on some of the policies that were already part of the agenda from the 2018-2019 year, or sorry, the 2019-2020 year, since we'd be adopting the 2020-2021. Tonight's discussion is really just an opportunity for council to ask any questions, highlight anything they think might be missing for the discussion at the annual retreat, or anything that they want to flag as a concern that needs to be discussed. Once the annual retreat is held, if the policy agenda is unanimously adopted, which generally everything's discussed until everybody's on the same page, we will bring back the finalized policy agenda on July 13th. And I would be happy to let Jenny add anything because I know she's been working really hard with the steering committee and the policy committee on getting this finalized.
Great. Yes, Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Becky did a really fantastic job providing an overview of this document. In years past, the entire CC4CA board comes together for our planning retreat or for our annual retreat. And that's the space where we, have in the past collectively wordsmithed and thought through different policy initiatives that we may want to include or take out of the policy statement. And I was a part of the smaller committee that was requested to take a look at our full statement and identify, how do we make this a more streamlined process for our annual retreat? And what we really determined is that this document is very much matured. And so, that's part of the reason that we took out a lot of the description paragraph language after each policy statement, because we felt like, it was better for us to provide an overarching view of what we were interested in advocating for. And so I think what's before you is a pretty solid document that aside from the one addition around telecommuting, I don't expect to change substantially. So I am more than happy to tag team with Becky and answer any questions that you all may have. And as she mentioned, going to the policy retreat or into the CC4CA annual retreat is the place that will kind of build consensus for a final agreement on the policy statement. And then that'll come back to all of you in July for final adoption. And final adoption is required by all of the member jurisdictions that are part of CC4CA, because we do believe that there's a lot of power in all of our jurisdictions agreeing on specific policy tenets. So I will leave it there and offer if anyone has any questions, I'll do my best at answering them.
Thank you for your work with that. It's amazing. Any other questions? No? Well, thank you, Becky, and thank you, Mayor Pro Tem Wilford. That was a great summary of what's going on. Okay, I think we'll move into the second item for our study session, the COVID-19 response, community investments. So Rupa, assistant to the city manager, is going to introduce that item. Welcome, Rupa. Would you like me to project?
Yes, if you can pull up the PowerPoint presentation.
Okay, will do.
So while the mayor is pulling that up, I'm here to present to council how staff will implement council's prioritized list of COVID-19 community investments. And just as a reminder, council prioritized this list on May 11th. And if you want to start on slide 2.
Sure.
So these are the investment categories that council prioritized ideas in: public health, internal city expenses, education, support for businesses, support for community organizations, and support for residents. In addition to council's ideas, we also asked for community input, and this period will be open until June 15th. And the picture that you see is where the community can find where they can get their ideas. If you go to our homepage and then click on the icon that says, what would help you through COVID-19 impacts? Click on that, and then you'll see the second screen that gets pulled up. And also communications has been periodically posting it on our social media pages as well. So we've been taking those ideas and sending it out weekly to council. And any additional new ideas will be prioritized by council during the June 22nd regular meeting. And after that, based on the council's list, we'll provide the same analysis to council regarding the new ideas, and we'll go through the same procedure that we'll go through tonight. So on the next slide, you'll see the criteria that we used on how we would implement these ideas. And I'll turn it over to Corey, because Corey provided a legal memo in regards to each idea's CARES Act eligibility and constitutionality. So Corey.
Good evening, Madam Mayor and members of council. I just wanted to very briefly go through kind of what we looked at to determine eligibility, and before turning it back kind of to go through the PowerPoint and the summary of how that plays out. But there's two considerations from a legal perspective. The first is the CARES Act eligibility. And to be eligible under the CARES Act, there needs to be three things: that the expenditure is necessary due to the COVID-19 crisis, it was not accounted for in the budget as of March 31st, and the expenditure will occur between March 1st and December 30th. the federal government has put out a whole host of guidance on CARES Act eligibility. The trouble is that's not the end of the analysis for Colorado local governments, because for Colorado local governments, not only must the expenditure be authorized by the CARES Act, but it also must satisfy what's known as the public purpose doctrine. And really what that means is you can't make any direct donation or grant to a person or entity unless it furthers a public purpose. So when you see the constitutional analysis in the memo and in Ruben's presentation, that is whether it satisfies the Colorado constitutional requirement. So there could be cases where a given expenditure is eligible under the CARES Act, but unconstitutional under Colorado law, or ineligible under the CARES Act and constitutional under the Colorado Constitution. So that's sort of the quick and dirty. And we're obviously, in order to use CARES Act funding, you need to have both. In order to have general fund funding, you would need to have compliance with the Colorado Constitution.
Anybody have any questions for Corey before we move on? Nope. Okay. All right. I'll go back to the presentation.
And then the other two criteria that we used is estimated costs and the logistics. So we'll go through each one of the categories. So under public health, so the first idea was PPE needs at senior facilities. So right now, Commander Osgood has been in contact and working through the Adams County Office of Emergency Management. He is in communication with our 4 care facilities to determine their needs, and any PPE needs, he'll relay that to Adams County. So that's why the estimated cost is a little bit unknown right now, but we'll continue to monitor it. And, you know, we can augment anything that Adams County Office of Emergency Management can't do. One thing that Mayor Pro Tem Wolford had mentioned was if we can provide masks to the residents at the care facilities. And Commander Osgood did check in with them, and they did say that, yes, that is something that they'd be interested in. So we can certainly provide that. And the logistics would be that we would continue to work, Commander Osgood would continue to work with Adams County Office of Emergency Management to coordinate any needs that senior facilities would have. The next idea is the hand washing station and hand sanitizers at parks. So staff determined that the most feasible way to do this is to have 20 hand sanitizer units at parks with playgrounds and or picnic shelters, because those are more likely to be of high usage to the public. We did look at the hand washing stations, and we were very concerned about our ability to keep them full. Vendors offer to do weekly service, but that likely will not be sufficient because they're probably going to need regular cleaning. And then also just the nature of hand washing stations with the soap and the paper towels are kind of messy outdoors, and it's not really supervised at all times. So we decided to do just the hand sanitizer stations. In addition, the hand washing stations aren't available right now with most of the vendors, and the hand sanitizer stations also are not available right now either. So staff looked at purchasing the dispensers and sanitizer refills and doing that on our end, and also maintaining it in the house. So that's why you see that 20,000 to 111,800 range. 20,000 would be if we do it ourselves, and the 111,800 would be if it would be a cost estimate if we could get a vendor to do it and if it's available. So any questions on those two before I move on to the masks?
Mayor, I do have one quick question, if I can.
Yes, Councilmember Mullica.
Awesome, thank you. Rupa, do we have any idea when our actual just regular bathrooms are going to be opened again for our parks?
So that guidance actually came out today by the state, and Heather, feel free to jump in about when playgrounds and outdoor recreation activities can be open. So we Haven't gone through those yet because there's just draft guidelines to go into effect this Thursday. So
yeah, I would ask Amanda, are you on the line? Do you want to jump in and talk about what our approach has been with our restrooms?
Sure. So the draft guidelines that Rupa was referring to, we are going through those and providing feedback in advance of their finalization for Thursday. During my brief review of those today, I don't believe they call out restrooms specifically. We've been handling those on a case-by-case basis based on what we feel like we can manage. They have been open at the dog park for several weeks now at JC Park. We have not had any issues with that, so that's a good sign. It certainly doesn't get the same type of use that we see at EB Rains. But I think that would be one of those next steps if we're in a place where parks are open to a greater degree and we're encouraging people to recreate and to spend a more significant amount of time than the current, or I guess the order that went through the original safer at home order, which encouraged people just to go to a park for activity and then leave. The new order, based on the direction we've seen so far, appears to be encouraging people to stop and recreate, which would lend itself to open restrooms. So it was a long answer to, I think we would do that hand in hand with the, as we institute the new guideline.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And another kind of follow-up question for that. So the numbers that you're showing us are hand washing stations plus hand sanitizers at parks. Is there any way to tease out the cost difference between hand washing and hand sanitizer? Because hand sanitizer might be, you know, cheaper, easier to install, right? I mean, you really just need a stand with some hand sanitizer that keeps, you know, spitting out. So
I think it's a breakdown of that. So the costs that are there in front of you are actually only for the hand sanitizer stations. The difference in the two prices, the $20,000 is our estimate if we were to purchase those units, and that's a pretty heavy duty, meant for outdoor park use, semi-permanent installation of a unit with hand sanitizer put in. We have checked with one of our vendors who was able to say that if it's, depending on the type of dispenser, if it's a refill from, say, a gallon jug, he can guarantee that he can provide delivery of that product for us through the remainder of the year. We do have several calls into vendors to see what the timing is on delivery of those hand sanitizing the units themselves, as well as pricing and install. We would probably install ourselves, but the details. So our estimate based on preliminary information from the vendors is that whole process would be about $20,000 for 12 weeks of sanitizer plus the 20 semi-permanent installed units. The $111,100 is actually what it would cost us to do biweekly service if we were to rent the units. So they would actually come out, drop the units, replace the sanitizer, and do that check twice a week. We are hearing from others that they're seeing pretty significant vandalism with some of those units. The vendors themselves said that's what they're seeing. And there are no rental units currently available.
Okay, thanks. Those numbers, yeah, that's a lot of money to be throwing out towards hand hygiene, which is important. Everyone needs to be doing their hand hygiene, but I would also like to think about how can we get our restrooms that we do have available up and running for better use, and that does include making sure we have soap and water available at each of those, which soap is sometimes questionable. But then in those areas that we don't have restrooms, how much would it cost to do a hand hygiene station? I think that would be a really interesting breakdown for me.
So those hand sanitizing stations to purchase are about $350 per unit. And then we did an estimate at, I believe, a gallon of hand sanitizer per unit per week. So the $20,000 doesn't need to be that full amount. That's assuming 20 units at 12 weeks. Does that Does that answer your question, or am I?
No, I think I understand. Yeah, thank you for the breakdown. I think what I would like to just understand more is with the bathrooms opening up to actually do hand hygiene, how many hand sanitizer stations would we actually need at those locations that don't have sinks?
I see. So the way we came up with 20 was we did one for each, or at least one for each park that had a playground or a pavilion. We only have the E.B. Rains restroom and the J.C. Ballfield restroom and the Northwest Open Space restrooms as our plumbed restroom facilities. And each of those, we would assume we would probably need more than one unit. So I think the same would apply even if we had the restrooms open. We would probably still want to place units at entry or exit points, or immediately adjacent to a playground, or immediately adjacent to a picnic shelter. But really, it's a range for you. If you would like to just place them at highest use parks, we can certainly pick and choose.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, anybody else on public health? Oh, Councilmember Goff.
Thank you, Mayor. Since I was listening to this discussion, I think I would certainly encourage more like the 20 sanitizer units rather than less, just because I think we're going to see more, people, the more of those, the better, in my opinion. And I know we will unfortunately have some vandalism and damage, and then we will probably have to be replacing some of these, but I would not recommend going under the 20 units.
Just double checking for hands. Anybody else? No? Okay, Rupa, I will advance the slide if you're ready, or no?
Yeah, so the next slide is the last public health idea, which is masks. So you can go to the next slide. So masks. So with council's approval last week, we went ahead and ordered 12,000 adult masks and 3,000 youth size masks. And we'll be giving these away first at the June 13th, 8:30 to 10:30 event at the marketplace. And then also during the food truck summer goodie bags events that we'll be having on the 23rd, 26th, and 30th, any of their needs with masks as well.
This is Heather. I just want to interject with a couple thoughts or comments for council's benefit. Some communities have put together mask giveaways, and we had looked into the Castle Pines mask giveaway, and they had provided disposable masks to their residents. So we did, Madeline and Rupa did identify a high quality 2-ply mask. If you can see it, I'm holding it up to my screen right now. It's a great mask, and I think our residents will like this mask because it will be able to be washed multiple times. So if you get any questions about costs or things along that nature, we'll make sure we have some talking points put together for you for that event, so residents better understand the benefit and quality of what they'll be receiving. Thanks.
It is 100% cotton and made in America.
I appreciate the talking points, Heather. I think for all council, I don't know if it's everybody or if it's just me right now, but there's a lot of movement on social media and discussion with some of our residents that don't buy in to masks. They really don't believe that they're necessary. And so we could potentially get some pushback on spending this money.
Mm-hmm. I agree with you, Mayor. I'm getting tons of calls. Well, tons. I probably had a half dozen calls, enough. And I've had some comments, you know what I mean? So I agree with you. I was going to ask about that tonight, so that's great. I agree with you.
Yeah.
Would you like me to respond to that, Mayor, or?
Sure. Yeah, that'd be great.
Well, I think, so there's a couple of things council needs to consider. Not only did council pass a public face covering directive a couple of weeks ago, that was in line with all of the guidance that we've received from not only the CDC at the federal level, the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment, more importantly, Tri-County Health Department. So it is proven that a face covering does help slow the transmission, if not reduce the transmission risk when you're wearing a face covering. All indications that I've received and that has been shared at the local and state level is that use of face masks will exist for quite some time. So I can certainly understand any potential concern from the public. I think it's important to understand that the money that is being used to purchase these face coverings is coming from CARES Act dollars. And this is what that funding is designed for. If not in COVID-19, we would not be making this purchase. So I think, regardless of where you fall in terms of belief as to whether or not a face covering is appropriate or not, I think the city has an obligation and responsibility to provide these face coverings to our community and do what's possible to protect and support the overall health of the community.
So Heather, I agree with everything you said. I think most of us do. However, that doesn't help us respond to residents that don't believe anything that you just said. They really just 100% are on the opposite side of that. And a lot of them are coming at us with their own data saying that CDC said no masks, and there's articles to find and there. So I'm wondering if there's a succinct way, and maybe we can add it to the flyer, because I know our flyer is cute and it talks about the reason to wear them. But I think people that already understand that take it and go, oh, thanks. I really appreciate you giving me a mask. Like, that's a really nice thing for the city to do. But if you 100% believe that the statistics we're sharing are wrong, and that the other statistics, the other side of this, and so I don't even know if maybe Councilmember Mullica could speak to it from the Tri-County Health Department phase, but we're most, if not all of the correspondence I receive has a list of doctors and organizations that have said they have no purpose. And those things are floating to the surface more and more. And so if we could have statistics or some data to back it up, or I don't know, I believe it because I'm reading different things and I'm in different meetings. Our council members believe it for the same reasons. And so we can either preach to the choir and just let it go, or we can be ready, especially if there's a financial pushback. Because those same people want us to spend our CARES Act money. That's not the argument, but they may want us to spend it to save businesses in a different way, or to get people back to work, or, they just have a different perception. I just think we all need to be aware of some of those conversations. And I can certainly share mine. If other council members are getting them, we can share them with one another so that we have kind of the same bank of comments and questions.
I think it's good, Meredith. I mean, I actually got frustrated with one person this weekend, and it's like, it's not my fault. I wear it to protect you, but I would have liked to have had something. I would have liked something to go through my head. You know what I'm saying? So that I didn't get frazzled at the end being called a Nazi, Yeah, so talking points would be really nice.
Well, and that is true. Councilmember Mullica, I'll get to in just a second. I do see your hand. Because the comments, like if someone called you a Nazi, there's lots of comments out there. We're tyrannical, where we've had Hitler references. They're going very, very extreme, talking about the mask being something that's violating their rights and overstepping. And the overreach of the government, and they're going to an extreme with their feedback.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really hard. Councilmember Mullica?
I think the only thing I was going to add is I like the talking points. I think, and I've been thinking about this a lot, of just kind of this, some of it is a combination of a couple of things. One is general misinformation, but then other people who just, they really just don't want to wear a mask. It doesn't really matter what the recommendation are or what they believe. They just don't want to wear it, and that's their own thing. But one of the things that I think could be helpful is in the talking points, maybe even formulating it as like a FAQ type thing of, one of the things that I've heard a lot is, do masks hurt your immune system, for example, and having like direct response to some of those questions that we've been already getting, that I think could be helpful. Yes, I think a lot of it is really just going to be preaching to the choir. If you're going to come to an event where there's free masks, there's a reason, like you obviously generally believe in getting one and you believe that it's going to be helpful for these general things. But I think, coming up with like a general FAQ could be really helpful. But other than that, yeah, I mean, there's not much you can do about people who don't want to believe in the recommendation or the science behind it.
Councilmember Escobar.
Thank you, Mayor. I just wanted to support the idea of talking points. However, I also want to make a point that we as elected officials were elected to lead and to set the example. So if we can't set the example and we can't take a stand on leadership, then maybe we need to question why we're serving. Thank you.
I don't know what that, I agree with you. I think we all are taking that stand, so I'm not quite sure what that was directed at. I don't know if you think anyone is not taking a stand. I think we get that, and that's our role. Can you clarify that for me?
Yeah, I guess I was more leaning to the rhetoric that is being pushed out there by whoever they are. I mean, we can point fingers, but that's not helpful. But there's rhetoric out there about, the mask this, the mask that. Well, I think we should have our drive. We should order our masks. We should wear our masks, and we should be able to respond to inquiries about why or how we feel about that. Does that help clarify, or did I run
No, I agree. And I think there's a difference for me just in this conversation, because I think we've already done the mask or no mask piece. That was a couple weeks ago. But this is, are we going to get pushback for spending $70,000 in this way? That's just a lot of money. And I know it's CARES Act money, but I think it would be nice to have some good talking points for all of us to make sure that we're addressing the budgetary piece of this.
Right. I mean, $70,000, if it saves one life, it's worth every penny of it.
I agree. Councilmember Peterson.
Thank you, Mayor. A couple of things I think we should remember too is that the masks are one part of a multi-tiered approach and problem to this, right? And obviously there's the cost of this. We know that we're spending $850,000 on the Elevate grant for businesses, $150,000 for the Adams County loan, indeterminate amount of dollars that we're getting public feedback on and surveys on in terms of how, accordance with the law and the Constitution, state and federal, that we can spend this money and allocate this. So I think it's important as we frame this with residents that this isn't our only solution, right? This is one arrow of many in a quiver. And we are approaching this, and I think we'll continue to do this, which is including public feedback on how we should spend, right, due date on June 15th, how we should spend this CARES Act funding. So just one thing to keep in mind, my perspective is this is one solution that we're doing along with a multi-tiered solution for residents, businesses, individuals, and the like, as opposed to a one-size-fits-all, supposedly heavy-handed expectation. This is just one thing out of many that we're doing.
Excellent. Perfect transition back to Rupa. Are we ready to move on?
Yes, category 2. So internal city expenses. So the first, reserve some funding needs for a potential second wave. So just depending on what we use it for, that'll determine whether or not it's CARES Act eligible and constitutional and what the cost is. And you'll see at the very end of this PowerPoint presentation how much money we have left over, so to speak, that we could reserve that funding for future needs. The payroll expenses. So payroll expenses for public safety employees whose services are substantially dedicated to mitigating and responding to the public health emergency. So that is what's CARES Act eligible. So logistically, that would include the police department employees that are part of EOC. So we estimated that cost to be about $25,000. Modification expenses necessary for compliance. So that includes things like the sneeze guards that you see in the city clerk's office, and any technology and telework software that was purchased, equipment that was needed. We estimate that to be about $150,000. And then the paid sick and family leave for public employees when we were only doing telework and when it was only for essential employees only. So that cost we estimate to be around $900,000. Any questions on this category?
Councilmember Brown.
You know, I just need someone to explain to me why, if that money was already in the budget, we would be taking that from CARES funding that could be used for another community need. We didn't spend any more money than we already budgeted for their salaries and everything. Why would we want to take that from CARES money?
So this was the prioritized list that council.
Right. And I totally get that, Rupa. I'm not blaming it on you. But I guess the question to my fellow council people is, do we really want to spend that on salary when it was already in the budget? So wouldn't we just be replenishing our budget with that money? I mean, it's not like we're going to take that $900,000 and disperse it out to everybody. We'd just be replenishing our budget. And I'm not so sure that we should be doing that with CARES money when we could be using that $1 million, 1/3 of our money, for the betterment of our community.
Heather, do you want to take that?
Sure. To Councilmember Brown's point, I mean, certainly we can go either way on this. It's an identified potential use, and council previously prioritized it. As you see presented this evening, to Councilmember Brown's point, we have paid employees throughout this entire COVID-19 response. And up until about 3 weeks ago, when we shifted some of our approach with seasonal and part-timers, non-benefited employees. So to keep it simple, if council decided to do otherwise tonight, that's fine. We would want to have that direction moving forward at the end of this meeting. But certainly, I mean, it's a reimbursement. So, you know, I can't disagree with what Councilmember Brown is saying, but, you know, it's funding that could be used to offset that expense.
We know how I feel. And then I would have to wonder, and I know Corey's on the line, if we take that $900,000 from CARES money and we put it back into the general fund, it just sounds really shady to me. Corey, do we have any, could we get in trouble for that?
Again, it has to, in order to use CARES funds, now it has to have not been accounted for in the 2020 budget. So we are talking about that component of dollars that wasn't accounted for in the 2020 budget.
But it had to have been because we budgeted for all of our staff every day. We didn't budget for any kind of an interruption in service. So it had to have been in our budget under salaries when we approved it, right? I mean, That's what I'm saying. And I guess I'm asking you to make me understand why this is different, because it was in our budget. We agreed to the total amount of money for our employees, and we didn't defer from that. We stayed with our plan. I'll just leave it at that. I find it very questionable on that particular instance to be paying ourselves back that money at that amount.
So can I ask a clarifying question? And then I have Mayor Pro Tem and Councilmember Goff next. But Heather, could you explain the 900,000? Because I think now I'm confused. So the title says paid sick and family leave. I was assuming that was if they got sick with COVID or someone in their family did. And so that would be something different than pre-budgeted amount. So, but what I hear Becky saying makes me wonder if this is actually budgeted salary expense for employees that we placed on leave because of the shutdown, so to speak. So can you speak to the difference?
Sure. The federal government issued CARES Act. I believe it was called CARES. Corey, correct me if I'm wrong, early on. After COVID-19 developed in terms of what we're required to provide to employees throughout our response. So while we have budgeted salaries, to Councilmember Brown's point earlier, we did not budget in respect to responding to a major health pandemic, which would require the city to provide paid sick and family leave for our employees. So we currently, so I'm gonna stop there. And Jason, interject if you feel like I missed something. That's the simplistic piece of it. So we budget for employee salaries on an annual basis, but this piece is tied in specifically based on the federal legislation that was passed early on that requires us as an employer to provide paid sick and family leave for public employees during this COVID-19 response. So yes, we budget for salaries, but this is a different element of that. So I think the benefit of reimbursing is that we could just absorb that expense, or we could reimburse for that expense. I'm trying to keep it simple, Corey.
Yeah, no, and I'm going to just, I'm going to quote from the frequently asked questions from the Coronavirus Relief Fund that was updated as of May 28th. So this is the most recent guidance. And it says the fund is designed to address, to provide ready funding to address unforeseen financial needs and risks created by the COVID-19 public health emergency. So going along with what Heather said, I don't think the city contemplated the level and I guess robust nature of the leave that is now being taken and was required to be taken as a result of COVID-19. So that was unforeseen and wasn't accounted for in the general 2020 budget that contemplated payroll expenses in what I would call a standard year. So we will be able to, and the guidance specifically reflects that if you want that to be an authorized expense, it is.
Okay, Mayor Pro Tem Wilford.
Thank you. This is, even after Heather's explanation as well as Corey's explanation, I still find myself a little bit confused here because I know that we did go through all of our benefits package this last fall, and I know that all of our vacation and sick leave is packaged together. $900,000 is a pretty specific number. So I assume that you've thought through the logistics here. Is the $900,000 divided by all of our employees, and they have a certain number of days that they can take in excess of their sick and their vacation leave for COVID related issues? Or is it to basically cover our employees' existing pay and paid vacation as well as sick leave that already exists within the budget.
Jason, do you want to jump in here and talk about how you came up with the number that we're putting before council, please?
Yeah. So when this first started, in order to comply with health precautions, certain facilities closed down, certain staff members were sent home. We've continued to pay those staff members. So as Corey was mentioning, this is unforeseen compensation. People have not been using leave to be that are not working. So this specific number comes from the payroll expenses that have been incurred for people unable to telework, but to continue to be paid. So we haven't asked people to use their leave, and they've continued to be paid.
So what I'm hearing is that this is not necessarily paid sick and family leave. This is paycheck protection. Sorry, I've always been a major proponent of providing paid sick and family leave. And I feel like we're really blurring the lines here in terms of what is paid family leave and what is paying someone, continuing to pay someone who is not able to either telework or is not considered essential. So they are coming in and working, in whatever form is allowable. I don't know, this just feels really questionable. I feel like we've moved forward, through this COVID time with, a lot of trust in staff that, we should continue to fund the things that are in our budget. And it feels like, our employees' salaries and their, paid time off, their paid sick leave is already included in the budget. And so I'm just really questioning what exactly this is and still don't really feel like I have a clear answer.
I would say that this falls under the category of paid sick leave, that we continue to compensate people who are not working.
But they're not sick.
Yeah.
Ultimately, this is something that can be taken out. Part of the initial idea behind this was when council did direct staff to find cost-saving measures when we identified how much fund balance was going to be used. So this was one option, one possibility for using CARES money to continue to support not needing to do furloughs and layoffs. We thought that this was a possibility. If that's no longer the desire, if the concern is not there to minimize the impact on fund balance, certainly I would say that could be something that we change. We're not hanging our hat on this at all. This is just the impact from having to react to COVID, close facilities, continuing to pay employees. So.
I think, Jason, for me, I think the hard part is the title. And so that's why when Mayor Pro Tem said they're not sick, that's the piece that I get confused about. So this is more about continuing to pay employees that were not working for a period of time. This is not paying them to be sick or to be on leave because their family was sick. So I just don't know, because I've heard a couple times tonight, well, council wanted us to do it. Well, council brought this forward. I didn't bring it forward like that. So
this is consistent with the language that the CARES Act had supplied early on. So
I don't know. I think we have enough confused people that I don't think council brought it forward as anything other than paid sick and family leave, as opposed to where we started with Councilmember Brown's question, reimbursing ourselves for paying people not to work. So I think those are two things. Like if we need to set aside money in case someone gets sick And then we don't want them to spend 14 days of their own sick leave. We want to be able to provide that for them if they get COVID. That, I think, that was my thinking when we did this, and I'm seeing a couple nods. And so if we need to set aside money for that, I still think that's purposeful. But back to Councilmember Brown's point, if we've already paid them and that's already in our budget, that reimbursement piece may not be necessary. Mayor Pro Tem?
I just want to ask a follow-up question. So how much, I guess, how many employees, how much money have we spent thus far paying individuals who are home but not sick? And how much money is realistic to put aside for individuals who are employees, in the event that they do contract COVID or a family member contracts COVID and they need care? What is a realistic number to put on this pot?
So to date, we've spent roughly $900,000 to pay people who are not sick and home to meet safety precautions who are not able to work. As far as a number going forward, I'm not sure. There's the emergency FMLA that comes into play. So if staff is either sick or has somebody to take care of, or daycares aren't open and they need to take care of a child, they have 12 weeks of FMLA that they can come to at 2/3 pay, which would cost the city money, which would also count towards this concept.
So I have multiple hands. I'm going to go with Councilmember Goff, and then Mullica, and then Brown in order.
Okay. Thank you, Mayor. I do want to agree with Councilmember Wilford that I believe I understood that the money that we had set aside was to pay people who contracted COVID or came into contact and needed to be quarantined or have a family member in the same situation, so that amount of time that they would have to spend home did not come out of their regular sick leave, because it's just an extraordinary situation that we're in. So that's what I was going to ask before we even got further into this discussion, because if someone were to get the COVID, I don't know all the details of what sick leave benefits people have. But if they had to stay home, it could be even months if they actually contracted and they have to go to the hospital. So I don't know if we wanted to put some kind of a limit, or, I don't know what other agencies out there will help people, in that kind of a situation. But that is what I had in mind at that time. And that's what I was going to ask about. How is this using up? If we don't allocate this money right now, does that mean that these people will lose, they won't have any sick leave in case they break a leg next month or something? Hopefully they won't. But so that's, I'm just going to say that. And that's really all I want to say about that. Thank you.
Councilmember Mullica?
Yeah, I think I share in a lot of other people's confusion about what it is we're talking about here, because the title seems to not match the explanation of what the money is going to be used for. And so if I'm not quite sure what to do there. But one of the things that I feel like I really need is kind of to unpack this particular item. We talked about paid sick leave and family leave, yet I feel like Jason is talking about paycheck protection and and I understand he wants to use some of the CARES Fund money for the $900,000 that we lost doing paycheck protection. I think that's what's going on here. I'm not quite sure, but I feel like I need to kind of unpack this topic a little bit more. And another thing that I feel like that just kind of occurred to me that I really feel like I need in this is there any way that we could come up with like a a dashboard or some type of explanation of our expenses related to COVID. Not only what we have spent out of our general fund, but also with this care fund money. Like, as we're approving different things, I want to know how much we have left, because I really want to make sure that we are addressing, our residents' concerns and things like that. And I know that's what we're talking about here, but I mean, I feel like I need a bigger picture here of where all of this money is going. So those are my 2 comments. Thank you.
Councilmember Brown.
I think my biggest comment is that if as a council member, I am taking so much grief over masks, putting this money back to our general fund rather than spending it on our residents is going to cause even more heat. And I just want to get that out there because it doesn't feel right to me, but I'm not going to drone on about it. But I think that explaining why we took $900,000 to pay for salary that we already budgeted for is going to cause a response from our residents.
So just to clarify the category, how it's categorized, and I think Jason had said this before, but the paid sick and family leave for public employees, so that language directly comes out of the CARES Act guidelines, but really to everyone's point, it does refer to the money that we paid employees who were not able to telework because of COVID-19. So that's the $900,000 that was paid to employees. And Jason, I believe that was through May 18. So if that's something that council wants to take off the table, then certainly happy to do that with council's direction.
Well, I think the question, Rupa, that was laid out there was if we take it off the table for the purpose, not the label,
right?
Will our employees now not get paid?
No, I mean, so they still.
Rupa, let me interject, and Jason can interject as well. Employees will continue to get paid. Part of the unknown, and we'll have this conversation on June 15th, is the true economic impact in loss of sales and use tax revenue for April. And then as we get into late June, we'll have that idea of what the impact for May is. But with the April numbers, we'll better be able to, Jason will make a projection on what the remainder of the year looks like. So my approach throughout our COVID-19 response has been to provide stability within the organization, to pay employees. Different cities have approached this differently. You've seen cities do furloughs. You've seen cities require staff to take use leave in lieu of not getting paid. And so employees will continue to get paid. I think as we move from where we're at today into further revisiting the budget reductions made to date, we have not made reductions that impact level of service and staffing. However, 70% of our general fund budget is personnel related because we're a service organization. So you can only go so far with reductions before you start impacting personnel and level of service. So we'll continue to have that discussion on June 15th, but the simple answer to the question is staff will continue to get paid. If they take time off to go out of town for personal business, that sort of thing, they use their general leave time, and that's based on what leave they have accrued to date. So we've continued to accrue leave. We do have to look at a response, and this is a concern staff has brought up. If they potentially might lose leave at the end of the year, no one's going to lose leave. We're working with HR to figure out a way to honor the leave that staff members have accrued so no one loses accrual based on our traditional or standard maximum accruals. So not to go in too much of a different direction, but hopefully that helps address the question about whether or not staff will get paid.
I have two hands, actually three. So Councilmember Witkovich, Brown, and then Peterson.
Thank you, Mayor. I just had a quick clarifying question. I don't think you answered it, Heather, but I am sorry if you did. The question is whether or not this $900,000 has to be paid either from our reserves or from the CARES money, right? And we're just pretty much deciding which one. I mean, we could use CARES funding to pay for it, but if we don't, it comes out of our reserves, right?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Brown.
Speaking of that, Jason, what is our current reserve?
$25.5 million.
And what percentage is that, Jason?
90.
Okay, that's my point. We have a 90% reserve. So we have a 90% reserve. We need to spend this money on our residents with that much of a reserve. From the first conversations that we had, we know that many of our communities that are furloughing those people and laying their resources off, it's because they don't have a 90% reserve. We have a 90% reserve. I understand that it's going to go down and that we have some tax issues, but let's not hide this under calling it Family Paid Leave Act.
So real quick, Jason, can I just ask, I thought we went from 90 down to like 72 because we just spent money.
Yeah, that's what we project the reserve to be by the end of the year.
By the end of the year, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Councilmember Peterson, you were next.
Great, thanks very much.
Jenny, I see you.
In response to Ashley's point, so the bottom line is if that $900,000 isn't defined or allocated there, we're, our general fund is then short 900,000, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And then second thing, in the spirit, first of all, I'm not sure our points are exclusive here. I agree with Becky that fund and those monies should be spent primarily on our residents, but I also agree that I don't want our city employees to hurt in any way. So it seems to me that 900,000, the firm number there in column 4 would be more of a vague or malleable number in column 1 for the reserve, some fund for funding needs for potential second wave. And that's in fact, if it could be paid sick and family leave, again, God forbid somebody gets COVID and then they take 14 or 15 days from that fund as opposed to their accumulated sick bank. And so just to consider, I think that 900,000, regardless of what we call it or define it, but in terms of future and proactive paid sick and family leave might be better considered for a potential second wave. And again, this is through December, not necessarily now. So something to consider.
Thank you, Randall. So I have two more hands, but I need some clarification on why that money is coming out of our reserve and not just budgeted salary expense.
So, so a few months ago now, we did the low, medium, high projection of impact. And we all kind of identified that we'd have this high impact and our reserve level could decrease, about $8 million. So then at that time we had discussed about budget reductions, cost saving measures, reductions to limit that impact to the reserve. Although we have a 90% reserve, we talked about that going down to 75. And I think the number of $8 million was kind of eyebrow raising. So because of the reduction in revenue, we were trying to identify ways to limit that impact on the general fund reserves. So we came forward with operating reductions of 10%. We were then asked to find another 5% to get that number to 15%, which we were able to do, again, trying to not impact personnel ultimately at all. When the CARES money came forward. This was something that was identified as possible to find sick leave coverage, because ultimately we're allowing people to take sick leave or just leave in general to comply with the orders that have been issued due to COVID. So we identified how much we were spending per week and put that out as a possibility to alleviate some of that impact on the general fund reserves. So that is kind of the whole circle of kind of where it started. And when we finally are here, I appreciate Councilmember Peterson's comments of maybe that money needs to move over to a different column. We could take it to zero and apply it to some other program. That's ultimately why, at least I think, that we're having these discussions, getting public input, and then having regular discussions together, is to identify what you ultimately want to direct us to do.
Oh, come here.
Okay, so I have Mayor Pro Tem and then Councilmember Goff.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and thank you, Jason, for your explanation. I'm going to be totally honest in that I still don't understand why this is why we're being told that this is going to come out of general reserves. Because I feel like, over the last 2 months, we've been led down this path of, if it's in the budget and it's already allocated, then it's fine to spend that money. And now I'm hearing that we need this $900,000 or it's going to come out of our reserve, and that doesn't make any sense to me. We already allocated staff salaries, and so I guess it's just not sitting with me. It doesn't add up and it doesn't make sense. I'm 100% in favor of paid family leave, but what I want paid family and sick leave to actually be is paid family and sick leave. I would love to see some sort of program established so that in the event that a staff member or a family member, that would qualify under FMLA contracts the virus, that then employees are able to draw down time off out of this pot of money. And I see this as an investment in our community because our staff are frontline workers in the sense of they provide essential services to our residents every day. And if they're not healthy, they can't provide those services to our residents, which they need and we need in order to be able to operate our city. And so to me, funding salaries with CARES money is not an option. I would much rather see this used for actual paid family sick leave. And so I guess Jason, I still don't get it. If you want to take another crack at explaining it, great, but it doesn't make sense to me.
I'm going to move into, I have a couple people that I want to make sure get a chance to talk. So Councilmember Goff again, and then Councilmember Downing.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Due to the discussion we're having right now and the confusion that I'm hearing and also feeling somewhat myself, I feel like at this point that $900,000 should be taken off of this PowerPoint and just off the table for tonight, because we still don't know what the future impact of things are going to be. Well, and as someone said earlier, we're going to have a better idea of the financial impacts on the city, in a month or even 2 months. And we have until December 30th to spend the CARES money. And we may decide that we would spend it for exactly what we've been talking about tonight, but whether it's actual paid family and sick leave or if it's this salary protection or whatever you want to call it. But I just feel like tonight we should maybe not make that decision because we don't know how bad this is going to impact us. And we've got many months to deal with this. There could be a second wave, as Councilmember Peterson mentioned. I think it's quite likely we will. And we don't know what that impact will be either. So it might just be a good idea at this point to just take that off the table for tonight and come back and decide what to spend that $900,000 on in a future date.
Councilmember Downing. If you could unmute for us. We want to hear you.
Here we go. Thank you. I am totally in support, always have been, for paid sick leave and for our employees. But I'm really unhappy about after listening to this whole conversation. I really thought that the money would be used if one of our employees or their family members somehow or another had contracted this disease, and that money would be used for them, not for paid leave or to for the payroll protection. And that's what I'm hearing. We do have that potential of 72% in the reserve. I am just thinking that 900,000 really needs maybe to be put to a second wave or a different category. I think there's so many unknowns right now, and I really do believe that it was a little deceiving. The title is a little deceiving in how we're using the money, or would be using the money.
Thank you. Councilmember Brown.
Okay, I lied. I have one more question. Am I missing the purpose of this, Jason, is because you want to submit an invoice to the county, to Adams County, and get us reimbursed for that money before we run out of time?
No, not at all.
Okay.
That was the idea behind it. It's not to say that the idea in those funds couldn't be used for exactly what has been brought up tonight, as far as if somebody is sick, if somebody does need to continue to stay home to take care of a family member. I think it's all encompassing. So we're really getting down to some pretty finite details that, all of this is very gray. Even the guidance from the Treasury, as Corey mentioned, May 28th, they just sent out new guidance. The program hasn't been fully developed and identified as far as the federal dollars are concerned for anybody, quite honestly, yet. So we're on weekly calls with Adams County finance directors and attorneys, trying to do our best to interpret what the funding can be used for. So we continue with this, and I have no say in this, but I totally support taking this off the table, and we can circle back at some later date if it's not allocated to some other program that we're more comfortable with.
So going with Councilmember Goff's recommendation, because I think we do need to move forward. I think that is what we need to do, especially because council members don't seem to be clear, even if the CARES Act funding is calling it that. It's not lining up with how we're using it, the title and the definition. And so I think we just set it aside and we keep moving, but we're not going to allocate it right now. So I guess we would take it off our recommended list. I think what I'm hearing is that the majority, at least the people that have spoken, have said they do still support paid sick and family leave. However, I just want to put a small piece in there. I don't want to open a new can of worms, but I don't want this tied to a positive COVID-19 result, because there's a lot of gray area in that. And I don't want someone to be just as sick, but end up with a negative test. And so then they get docked pay, but they have something very similar. I just want us to be careful on that, which I think makes it maybe a really gray issue and something that we should probably talk about completely separately at another time. Heather, if you have one final thing, I think we should let Rupa move to the next slide.
Just a couple more comments for council's benefit. I was just going to recommend that we take this off. And I do want to say the intent was not to deceive, to not be shady. As Jason mentioned, this is a real gray area. And so we're working through this, and we appreciate the questions and the different perspectives to help us get to where we're at. The one thing I do want to make mention of that's important for council to understand, council did provide direction in the 2020 budget process for me to look at paid family sick leave And that research is being done, and that'll be brought forward in a separate discussion, separate from CARES Act. So this speaks to Councilmember Wilford's concern and questions about paid family and perspectives on paid family leave. So that's a separate process that's taking place. So thank you.
Okay, thank you. All right, Rupa, next one. You ready?
Category 3, education. So with this, we estimate costs to be about $50,000. And this would go to things like social media ads, having a longer connection newsletter to include more information related to COVID-19, direct mailers like the one that the mayor did. Our virtual hug signs can actually be CARES Act eligible if we include COVID-19 language on it. So that's something that we took into consideration. And then the $5,000 for education materials for non-English speaking residents. I know that was something that was important that council had mentioned during the last session. And there's a lot of resources out there with Adams County and the state that have already translated materials, but we thought about possibly utilizing a translation service if we needed to translate something like, for example, a direct mailer that the mayor did. To have a longer piece translated, we would use a contracted service for that. So that's where you're seeing the 50,000 and the 5,000.
Councilmember Goff.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I think Rupa answered my question. I was just going to suggest or ask about the Tri-County Health resources I've seen where they have a lot of COVID information translated into more languages than I even knew we had in Adams County. So that answers my question, and I didn't need to say anything. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you. All right. Here we go.
All right. Category 4 is support for businesses. So the first, it was the $25 idea. And I know this was really popular with council, so bear with me as I go through this. Our idea that we came up with is specific to restaurants. And the reason for that is because of the first piece with CARES Act eligible. Corey had advised that we just need to make sure that any sort of quote unquote voucher or gift card that we're doing is used in businesses that were negatively impacted by COVID-19. So we know for certain that restaurants are businesses that have been clearly negatively impacted due to COVID-19. In addition, we thought that providing a gift card for restaurants would also benefit the community since it provides a basic need like food. So the idea is that we would purchase 5,000 $25 gift cards from our 72 restaurants. So that calculates to about 70 gift cards from each restaurant. And this is, of course, if they chose to participate. And so one gift card will be put into each of the 5,000 summer goodie bags. And how communications and special events are doing the summer goodie bags is that it will be one per household, and they are going to be checking for residency. And so the original idea was to provide a $25 voucher for households. So the businesses would then turn that voucher into the city for credit on sales tax or utility bills. But logistically, not all businesses pay a sales tax or a utility bill. And administratively, it would have been a little bit of a challenge to track these as well. So we wanted to target a known hard-hit industry, which is restaurants. So the cost for that would be about $125,000. So if you guys have any questions before we move to the next idea. And if you guys are in support of that, obviously.
Mayor Pro Tem Wilford.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I like the idea of doing restaurants, but I do wonder if there's a way to explore other businesses that have been negatively impacted. I know just from being a member of the Elevate grant, small business grant task force that, you know, many businesses across the city have experienced an impact, you know, everywhere from, you know, massage therapists to childcare providers to automotive, you know, individuals in the automotive industry. I like the idea of restaurants, but most of them have been able to stay open. And so I wonder if there's a way to like broaden the reach of businesses that we're able to support here.
Councilmember Peterson.
Thank you. I think Councilwoman Goff had her hand up before me.
Okay, Councilmember Goff.
Now, you might just a really quick clarifying question. Do I understand that the resident opens up their goodie bag, there's a $25 gift card in that bag, and that gift card would be for a specific restaurant, or would it be that they could use it at any of the restaurants in our city, or is there a list of?
It would be a specific restaurant. So it would just be a random restaurant that they open up their goodie bag and they find a $25 gift card. And something too that, if council approves this tonight, then we would talk to our restaurants to see if they can put some sort of sticker or disclaimer on it that it can only be used in a Northglenn location, just in case it's a chain. But it would be a random restaurant from any one of our 72 restaurants or how many ever chose to participate.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Peterson.
And that leads on my point. Is there a way, especially for cost savings? So let's say I get a goodie bag and it's got a coupon to a restaurant that, I don't like, or I don't like that type of food. And we've already purchased, right, that gift card. And in essence, we could be throwing money away for the greatest of ideas, which I really love this idea, but might not be efficient in terms of use. Is there a possibility of having and I also agree with Mayor Pro Tem's point about maybe even opening this up for other hurt businesses. But is there a way that we could, again, the Northglenn business community that could collectively accept a universal voucher? And this voucher could be used at a restaurant of their choice or a business of their choice, or it's something that instead of just saying, here's one restaurant, and you throw it away because you say, maybe I don't like Chinese food. If you have a more general voucher that is still used, that could prevent potential waste of dollars by the randomness of the grab bag.
Jason?
So part of the gift card concept is ultimately ends up acting as a grant to the business, because the transaction occurs at the time that the city would make the purchase of the gift card. So whether or not the gift card ends up being used, one, it's in the hand of a resident to use, but then secondarily or primarily, it's an influx of funding to that business. So that's when the transaction happens and puts money in the pocket of the business, is when we make the purchase of the gift card.
And logistically, it might be, I don't know if then the business with their general voucher would then turn it back into the city for money off that voucher. I don't know if logistically that's something that we would be able to do, or if businesses would prefer them, like Jason said, to get the money from the city up front by purchasing gift cards from them.
Councilmember Goff?
Well, I mean, I do understand. I understand the logistical difficulties. So then I would go back to Mayor Pro Tem Wilford's question: if we could include other businesses. I mean, I think we would be able to figure out what businesses are impacted by, have been impacted by COVID-19, hairdressers and nail salons and other things. And if they're willing to give a gift card, then we could also include them then and buy a $25 gift card for their service and include those as well. That's my suggestion or question. I don't know what it is.
Councilmember Mullica and then Brown.
So I guess mine is on the same path that Catherine was just discussing, and kind of bouncing off of Jenny's comment, is that, if we could open this up to more, I guess, areas, more businesses, I think the benefit would be better. I know that the logistics of that might be a little tougher to figure out, but I feel like if we have somewhat of like a general voucher, then there is, you know, a less likely chance that someone's just going to throw it out. You know, the money, I get what Jason's saying, that, yeah, the money's already out there in the community. And so that's what matters. But we also want to make sure that this is a good resource for our residents. It's kind of part of the deal too. It benefits both parties. So if I get a $25 gift card to something I don't even like, how is that helping my family during this time? You know, maybe I need car repair. Maybe I need just a haircut. You know, there's so many other things that our residents need. So how do we make sure that they're getting an equal benefit as the businesses?
Councilmember Brown, and then Downing.
I know that our city offices are closed, but could we not put a voucher in the bag and have them contact, you know, the city, make an appointment, whatever, to come in and choose what kind of voucher they want? Or is that extending the process too much?
Well,
Does
this
someone
is
wanna-
Heather. So city offices are open by appointment. We started that today. I think the question for council, I'm hearing that you want to have it more open than just restaurants. Staff could take some time to further try to figure this out. We were trying to tie this to the goodie bag because that would be an immediate distribution approach. But that means that we will purchase gift cards and we will put a gift card for a restaurant in a goodie bag. As explained, potentially the gift card may not be used. We could do something in keeping with what's presented that a resident could donate the gift card, but ultimately the purpose of the gift card is to benefit our residents and support them through this time. So we can take a step back and try to figure out the voucher approach further. We went down this gift card road because it seemed more feasible and doable. So the point in terms of getting the goodie bag and that sort of thing, we can figure it out. But I think what needs further discussion is gift card. I'm hearing concerns. Voucher might be more realistic, but we've got to have more internal conversation about that. That's why we didn't head down that road originally.
So I have a couple council members, but I'm going to let Corey jump in the middle.
Thank you, because I think this discussion is raising a really important distinction that Councilmember Malika's question brought up and Jason tried to address earlier. And that is, this is intended to be a grant program on a small level, admittedly, but for the businesses. If we give a $25 voucher to our residents, that is likely a constitutional violation because there is a potential public purpose problem with just giving $25 to every resident. What's the municipal purpose? Whereas with a grant program to businesses, we know that it is being done, again, consistent directly with the CARES Act, which allows grants for businesses, but also consistent with the Colorado Constitution because we can create the public purpose that the more we can assist our businesses, the less likely we are to have empty storefronts as a result of COVID. So there's a reason that this was sort of directed at buying them directly from businesses as opposed to providing the resource directly to residents.
I have Councilmember Downing and then Mayor Pro Tem.
See here. Now that Corey said that, I don't know if my idea is a good one or not, but you know, you see these generic Visa cards, you know, where you could just take them to any business and utilize it there. But I don't know how we would track it to make sure that it went to a Northglenn business versus, you know, Westminster or Thornton. So I'm not sure about that tracking method, but that was something that I thought about. But I do. Go ahead.
Sorry, and it would have to be a Northglenn business that was negatively impacted by COVID. So it can't just be any Northglenn business.
Right.
to use COVID funding or to use CARES Act funding.
Yeah, but you know, I was just thinking of the generic Visa card that you can purchase anywhere to utilize at that type of business is what I was thinking about. But I like the idea of some type of a universal voucher anyway, if we couldn't do something like the Visa card. And I like the idea of looking at other businesses. You know, restaurants are great, and probably they would be utilized, but there are so many businesses in the entire city, but I just, a couple of them just pop up in my mind at the marketplace that are struggling, and they probably could utilize something like that.
Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I think I guess a couple of things. One is, the phrase negatively impacted to me is really broad. As we've seen in the Elevate Small Business Grant Task Force, there's a range as far as, what people perceive to be negatively impacted. Is it a loss of revenue? Is it a hardship? I just think that term is really broad. And so I first want to acknowledge that. And then two, I know when we've done Food Truck Carnival in the past that, we've had vouchers, and when somebody takes a voucher to that food truck and gets a meal up to a certain amount of, up to $10 or whatever it is, then the city reimburses them. And so I'm wondering why we couldn't still call this a business, grant program or whatever we want, but require that these businesses be reimbursed once they have received a voucher.
Jason,
Corey, is there any legal reason that we couldn't do that?
My turn.
It's a risk assessment question, and we know under the guidance that the grant program works, and we know that under the Colorado Constitution the grant program works. If it is not a direct grant to a business, and it is essentially a grant to an individual one way or another, there's more risk. Now, having said that, if the council is comfortable that it's not going to be challenged, then maybe it's a worthy, in terms of risk assessment, maybe it's worth doing. But there is the constitutional concern if it's not to business in this context.
So I have Councilmember Peterson and then Councilmember Goff.
Thank you, Mayor. And I appreciate the opportunity, as we've talked about in times before, to hear conversation and to change my opinion a little bit. The more that Jason explains this, coupled with Corey's constitutional issues, my first concern was that at $125,000, we're spending this money and people get a card for a place they don't want to go and throw it away, and that's money gone. And that's still not ideal. But at the same time, if that's money as structured as a grant program for businesses, however we define these businesses and the scope of these businesses, I think that is money well spent. And so that grant program that goes immediately, as opposed to a voucher, that goes immediately into a business, I think I like how it is structured with the potential of perhaps expanding beyond restaurants. But I now, ask acceptance to modify my opinion a little bit, but I like the gift card and how it's structured under a grant under CARES Act. I think it's a good idea.
Councilmember Goff.
Thank you, Mayor. I just would reiterate again that expanding it, if it's at all possible, I think it would be to more than just restaurants, because that we would, our economic development department, I'm sure Debbie and her folks would know other businesses that have been negatively impacted by COVID-19. We could have some of those businesses included in this. And as far as getting a gift card for a place that you don't like, I mean, I think, first of all, there's regifting. But I also feel like, we have a Northglenn Cares webpage and we have the Next Door Northglenn. There's I think in a way it almost is a community building thing where you could put out there, look, I got this for this restaurant that I don't go to, or I'm allergic to whatever or it's for auto repair and I don't need it, somebody else would.
Come here.
And there would be a way to either just give it to someone or sell it, or just I think that would be almost be a community building potential there.
Yeah, that one I have a harder time with. I think at the very beginning, when Rupa mentioned that the idea of restaurants was also to help our families that might be struggling, and food is a necessary thing. So I don't know if I don't think our grocery stores were struggling, but I just have a hard time with the services piece because that's the one that's going to go to waste. So if I get a car repair thing, or if I get a dry cleaning thing, or if I get a service I don't need, it's likely to either sit and expire or get tossed in the trash. And I think that's money that's more wasteful than the food piece. You can usually find at least something, and you can trade a food thing. So I don't know how to facilitate this in a way that combines the grant to businesses with the choice for residents. I think that's the piece. I think it could be a logistical nightmare to say that, these are the restaurants, and then you take your voucher and you go pick it up. So, maybe you get to come into City Hall and choose your favorite from the list. But I appreciate the choice, but I think that we've been told that the logistics of it have to work a certain way. So we have to buy the gift card from the business, and then we can move it on to residents in some way. But I don't know. I think it makes sense just based on food insecurity that if it's a restaurant, it makes more sense to me. But Councilmember Downing?
Just a thought as I was listening to you talk, and I know it's probably logistically a nightmare for staff, but I'm going to mention it anyway. Instead of putting it in the goodie bags, maybe we have these cards available to us when we're distributing and say, what would you like? I know it's probably something that would be a little more work, but it's something to think about. I think we lost the mayor.
Sorry, I just had to step away for a quick second.
Well, that's okay. I went because I know my internet goes dead, as you know, occasionally. Anyway, so that's what I thought.
Councilmember Brown.
My only comment on the gift cards, which I think is really awesome, I do feel that they should stay with the restaurants, but I don't know many people who wouldn't take a gift card from a restaurant. And quite frankly, if I were to get a gift card in mine for a restaurant that I've never been to, you could be building up their clientele at the same time. I know that without Debbie and Heather, I had not been to Saigon Palace, and now I can't stay away. So I get it, Is that what it's called, Heather? Saigon Palace or?
No,
Basil.
Basil, yes, Basil.
Yeah.
I love it. So, we do have a lot of restaurants that not everybody goes to. So it's a way of promoting those restaurants too. I think that the risk of losing money on it is really not a deal breaker for us, because we're doing what we need to do to help the businesses. And I don't see them throwing them away if they knew that there was a gift card in there. They'd probably be in the parking lot of Safeway trying to sell it, but
Councilmember Escobar.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm just curious to know how we decide what businesses we're going to buy these gift cards from, and how do we, who do we include, or who do we not include? Franchises, as an example, McDonald's or Arby's, or those are franchise, and I don't know that we want to do. I don't think I would want to do that. But how would we make a decision about what restaurants and who makes that decision. Now we're trying to infuse $125,000 into the business community. And I think it's got to be an easier way. Just give them the money. You know, if they need the money, give them the money. It's a whole lot easier than trying to figure out who's going to, you know, who has the greatest need in this restaurant business. I'm asking the question.
So to answer your first question about what restaurants we would choose from, so we would open it up to all 72 restaurants, regardless of whether or not they're a McDonald's or an Arby's, but we would ask them to put something on the gift card that says only to be used in the Northglenn location.
Councilmember Goff.
Thank you, Mayor. I think, let me see, get my thoughts and organized here. That the gift card, even though it is technically a grant to the businesses, it's a small one, and so giving it out to our residents this way, I think, as we've heard some different things that might introduce people to a restaurant that they've never been to, and I know it's a strategy for a lot of businesses to have some kind of an incentive to get somebody to come in. If you had a large family, or if it was maybe a more expensive restaurant, $25 isn't going to cover the whole bill. And so you're going to, bring an extra revenue just because the customer is coming in with that gift card. So, I really do like this idea of a gift card for the specific restaurants. I think it's fine to just evenly, distribute it amongst Northglenn restaurants. I don't have that much of an issue with the chains or the franchises or not. And if we can't, or there's an issue with the other service businesses, I understand that. I think the restaurant, I'd be fine with it as it stands. I'll just say it that way.
Okay, so where are we? There was a lot of feedback. Does the city have enough direction to move forward? So just
Mayor,
on that one side.
Yeah, I would like you to ask for consensus to move forward as proposed, because there was quite a bit of feedback. And I think to Councilmember Escobar's question about why we can't just give residents the money, I think we've answered that question, and the answer is no, we can't do that. Otherwise, that would be the simplest approach. And we wouldn't have proposed what we proposed. So I don't have a good sense that we do have consensus on this.
So my thinking on this is that we went back and forth a little bit. I heard that we kind of circled back around to restaurants. I think a lot of the questions came before Corey sort of laid down the restrictions on how we could use it. We had a lot of ideas right up until Corey said, yeah, you can't do it that way.
Sorry.
No, I thought that's what we needed to hear. So that helped us, I think, ground ourselves a little bit. I'd like to maybe, I can stop sharing and we can do just a little verbal thumbs up if you're okay as proposed. Jenny, what would you like to add? You need to unmute first, though.
Okay, thanks for that. I guess I'm okay with just focusing in on restaurants, but I'm really weary of the idea of focusing in on every restaurant, knowing that there are some that didn't, that perhaps didn't qualify under the small business grant program. And I feel like I'd much rather focus on some of those smaller businesses. I live around the corner from McDonald's. They always have a line. I don't know if they actually need the grant to get by. And so I'd rather focus in on the small mom and pops, the, Cakes by Karen, the Tamale Kitchen, the Bravos, the Saigon Basils of Northglenn, as opposed to some of the franchises that are fine and that haven't been as negatively impacted.
So Jenny, I think that, I'd like to push back a little bit and find out how we determine that, because Tamale Kitchen and Saigon Basil, those are also franchises. So
they're local though.
Well, still though. So that's what I'm saying. How do you maybe back to Antonio's question, who makes that call and how do we determine? Because when I think about Catherine's idea, it might be nice for one family to get a fast food chain versus a more expensive sit-down restaurant. And so, and then how do you determine financial need of a Northglenn restaurant? Because we have quite
struggling with even in the Elevate Small Business Grant Task Force is how do you determine need?
Yes.
How do you determine what a negative impact is? I don't have any philosophical.
Yeah. So Rupa said at the very beginning, and correct me if I'm wrong, that there were 72 restaurants in our city. And you said a couple different times, depending on how many choose to participate. So how are we reaching out to them? I mean, it's 5,000 $25 gift cards and 72 restaurants.
Yeah, so we probably have about 10 of us that are going to be splitting that list and contacting those restaurants to see if they want to participate and then purchasing the gift cards from there.
Okay. I mean, quick math, if everyone said yes, that's quite a few gift cards.
It's 70 gift cards. So if everybody said yes, it's 70 gift cards from each restaurant. If all 72 said yes.
Has anyone thought about that idea about how do you determine financial need? Because most restaurants stayed open and were doing takeout or delivery. Some probably had more customers than others, but I think everyone was hit without having the ability to sit inside.
Yeah, I mean, in restaurants too, and Corey, correct me if I'm wrong on this analysis, but since restaurants were forced to close their dine-in portion, we could say that they were negatively impacted by COVID-19, correct?
That's correct. That's correct.
Councilmember Brown?
I just wanted to continue to share my support for the gift cards. As far as how we determine which restaurants get it, I'm trying to wrap my head around that, and I don't know how we would do that. But I do feel that every restaurant was negatively impacted by COVID. And one of the ways that we know that is from the grant programs that we did for rent. We did get a lot of information that we could mine into in regards to our businesses for that. I just think it's really important. And I think that it would work both ways. The residents would have something to look forward to, and our businesses would be getting the money. So that's all I wanted to say.
Councilmember Malika?
Yeah, I just want to say I support these gift cards for the restaurants. I think it makes sense, and especially after Corey's explanation. So I'm okay with moving forward with this. I do have a quick question though. Are places like Starbucks going to be included, or what about Cinnabon, locations like that? Because I actually think, especially the Cinnamon Roll place, I think they actually had to close their whole store. I mean, so I'm just wondering, what about some of these other smaller things that, I would love to have a gift card for an amazing cinnamon roll. But so are we thinking about some of those other places too, or we're just gonna stick it to restaurants?
Debbie?
I'm just going to chime in here. So we really did talk about this a lot. We originally talked about taking out all the nationals because that's what we did for the Elevate Small Business Grant was we took out national chains and we allowed just local franchisees to do that. But the more we looked at it, we came to the conclusion that every restaurant, and that included Starbucks, and that included, all of the Cinnabons, and included everybody, that it was the fairest way to do it. And also to try to bring people in, as has already been discussed, try to bring people into new places that they had never been before. And that every time you go into a restaurant, I don't know if I'm a single person, so yes, I don't go in and spend more than $25, but most people have a family and they spend more than $25. So not only was it giving money to the restaurant directly, because we talked about the voucher piece as well, but then if it was reimbursable, then the businesses were actually out the money until somebody used the coupon. And so that did not work. So again, we could, if council wanted to do this, we could do it like we did the Small Business Elevate grant and say no national chains, but that's going to be the majority of our restaurants. I'll be quite honest, looking at most of these. We do have, a handful of the small businesses. So it's entirely up to council. And again, this was for the purpose of the goodie bag, to give something back to the residents that they would use. So we could do it either way.
So do you want to continue, Julie? Ashley was next.
Yeah, so just a kind of a follow-up question. I guess we want to try and keep this simple, which is why it's going to be restaurants, but it is also just kind of unfortunate that we would cut out areas like some businesses like Cinnabon or other bakeries like Cakes by Karen or things like that people could use. So I understand we want to make this easy. In there. Cakes by Karen would be considered a restaurant?
Yep, we consider it a restaurant as long as it's serving food. And Cinnabon is in there as well.
Councilmember Witkovich.
Thank you, Mayor. I just wanted to voice my opinion on this. I am in support of the $25 gift cards, and I think all 72 restaurants should be included. As far as the other services, automotive, hair, nails, massage, acupuncture, maybe we should think of something else, some other kind of program for those, maybe something that the residents, express their need for it, and then they go into the city and, they've got that sort of thing. I don't know. That's probably for another night, but I'm on board with the gift cards. But I do think we should circle back to the other services another time.
Is anyone against this idea? Do we have any absolute no's before we move on? Because there is a whole nother section that might relate to what Ashley just said as far as how can we support our small businesses. So Heather, do you feel like you have consensus now?
I believe I heard consensus, but I think to your point, if anybody's opposed, it would be good to know. Otherwise, we will move forward with it as proposed.
Okay, Rupa, back to you.
All right, that was some good discussion. Okay, so the next idea is small business grant programs other than rent. So what we heard from council is that there's interest in supporting small businesses other than the rent that the Elevate Small Business Grant already provides. So there's an attachment to the memo, I believe it's attachment 4, labeled Northglenn Business CARES Act ideas. So the economic development staff put together just a list of ideas for future consideration, and council will have the opportunity on June 15th to review these ideas, to add their own ideas, and then to determine how they want this quote unquote round 2 of small business grants to look like, what they want the money to be allocated for, and how much money should be allocated for a round 2. And just to note, the Elevate Small Business Grant Program runs through June 30th, and any money left over, council can choose to allocate the remainder of the money from the Elevate Small Business Grant Program to whatever a round 2 would look like. So we can have that discussion on June 15th, if that's okay.
Councilmember Malika?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I would like to, I'm not against supporting another grant program based off of feedback of how this current one is going. But one of the things I'm just kind of peeking ahead to, and I know this is going to be part of the discussion later, is that our support for businesses is very robust versus our support for community organizations and residents specifically is really puny. So if we get to a point to where we find we still have money for a grant program, a business grant program later on, awesome, let's have that conversation. But we've done a lot for our business community, and I really think we need to be focusing more and spending a lot more on those community organizations and our residents.
Any other comments on this, or do you want to scroll to the next one? Well, here we go.
Okay, so support for community organizations. I'm glad you said that, Councilmember Mulliga, because the $100,000 that we have for this category is 100% arbitrary. It's just something that staff put down for the purposes of having a number for the PowerPoint. So it really is completely dependent on what council wants to do. And the idea that we had, because we don't necessarily know what the needs of our community organizations are, is to utilize the outside agency funding committee to open up a sort of grant application similar to what we did with the Elevate Small Business Grant. So from my understanding and talking to Joanna, there's already an application that exists for community organizations to apply for. So we would tweak that application. We would open it up on June 15th. And the first round of review theoretically could be the week of July 6th, where the outside agency funding committee would sit down and review these applications. The application would also be reviewed by the outside agency funding committee first, before we open up the application process on June 15th. And the reason for this sort of tight turnaround time is because we need to expend the CARES Act funding by December 4th. So we wanted to give enough time for community organizations to apply for the first round, to potentially do a second round. But we're definitely open for suggestions for this, for especially the dollar amount, if you guys don't think $100,000 is nearly sufficient. And also direction from council on whether or not you like the idea of utilizing the outside agency funding committee to determine which organizations get funded and for what purposes.
Councilmember Goff.
Thank you, Mayor. I think the CARES Act eligible column is something that still, I mean, it looks like it still needs to be worked out. So it would be hard to decide how much money to give if there's so many restrictions that we just can't give it out the way we want. I know I've heard a lot of people, and I certainly totally agree that it would be wonderful to be able to help our citizens and our community, but it does seem like there are a lot of restrictions on how we can do that. And so unless there's some other creative ways of doing it, it even sounds like that, the utility assistance program, somebody's going to have to try to figure out if a person needs that help because of COVID-19. So I can't even imagine how you would go about doing that. Are you going to require documents that show that they lost their job because of it? Or, it seems very complicated. So I feel like these are all good causes, good things that we would like to do, but I still feel like I'm not sure that we can do them.
Councilmember Brown.
I'd like to talk just a little bit to the Northglenn Foundation. We actually have a very detailed application process, and each person that applies for assistance is graded, right? It's a point system, and that's how we determine whether their water assistance would be paid. I would imagine that we would split that. Hey, we would split that funding. Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, she's having a rough night. I apologize. I would imagine that we would put another spot on the application that would say, is this COVID related? And then they would have to provide details. Right now, they have to provide details on if they have a medical condition. Was it a loss of a job? Do you have plans on being able to pay your bill, later on? Are you gonna, what are we doing? We also require that they, in a lot of cases, they set up a payment plan with the city of Northglenn. So I think that it'd be very beneficial for someone from the Northglenn Foundation to talk to you guys or talk to us about exactly how we handle that kind of situation, how we rank them, all that good stuff. And I could see that being a joint action between City Council and Northglenn Foundation, either to create a separate, I really don't think there needs to be a separate application process, but I really think that meeting with them and having you all see what we go through, how we rank people, and how we make determinations on how much out of our grant program that we're going to pay towards a water bill. Sometimes in fact, we have a limit on the top of what we can contribute per person. So we would have to address that too, but those options are out there. And I think that having Leslie or Marcy Whitman talk to us about that and how we rank those people would be an excellent suggestion.
So I have Mayor Pro Tem and then Councilmember Downing.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I have two questions and then a comment. First question is for Corey. Corey, is all that's required here, that if we do grant funding to a particular organization to provide support for a Northglenn resident, that the Northglenn resident has to certify in some way or another that they have been negatively impacted by COVID? Or is there some other requirement?
It's a complicated question, but we're not looking for the resident to certify it. I think we're looking for the organization to identify that it is providing assistance to those who have been impacted by COVID. I think sort of the one-off, if you will, helps the city in a couple of ways, because it's looking to an organization that frankly might do this better than the city. And there's another issue that's sort of underlying this, much like the business grant program. And that is when we're talking about funding that might pay a city bill. So the obvious one is a utility fund. There's a very fine line because some of the guidance says that what we're doing is revenue replacement to us. That's not the purpose of the fund. The purpose of the funding is not to make Northglenn whole for someone that's not paying their utility bill. The purpose of the funding is to have an outside organization determine which residents are in need and impacted by COVID. And that line is important because the guidance says this can't be revenue replacement for the city as its primary purpose. So if we were to just do a straight grant for, again, I'll use utilities as the example, we run the risk that we are, again, paying ourselves, using it from the discussion earlier today, because we are the utility provider. Whereas if we use an outside organization that finds the people in need, the primary purpose is COVID related as opposed to revenue replacement for the city. And that is not a black and white analysis. There's a lot of shades of gray, but that's the issue.
So, but what I hear you saying is that, we could allocate a certain number of CARES dollars towards a grant program that then nonprofits that serve our residents could then apply for and identify what their processes are for, ensuring that those individuals whom they're going to serve have been negatively impacted by COVID and need the assistance, right? And then they're executing and providing that funding or those services in whatever manner possible. We're just providing the actual funding.
Correct.
Okay. So I guess if that's the case, then I feel, I feel like $100,000 is far too low in terms of funding for our community organizations to do what they do best. We started the business conversation about supporting our small businesses to the tune of $500,000, and I think that anything less for our community is just not enough. So I would support starting at $500,000, looking at more and really looking at grant programs that are, have applications completely vetted by the outside agency funding committee.
I think we have Councilmember Downing up next.
I am just wondering, I guess this is more for Jason since he's part of that group. But I'm just wondering, has there been an increase in requests due to COVA for the outside agency funding for help and utilities? I'm just kind of curious.
Not that I'm aware of at this time. As far as the utility assistance program, we'd have to touch base with somebody from the community foundation.
Okay.
But as far as my staff, who ends up kind of taking the initial application and then turning it over, have not heard anything about increased need or requests on that.
Thank you. So I guess for me then, I think I would like to investigate. Not that I don't want to help folks, which I do, but I think possibly we need to put the funding in a different place. You know, if in fact utilities are not impacted negatively. Does that make sense? I don't know.
Heather?
Mayor, I just wanted to ask Amanda Peterson, our Parks Director, to share more. She serves on the Community Foundation, so I think she can offer some insight on what requests they've seen, if any, in terms of an increase.
Hi, everyone. I'll put on my Community Foundation hat for just a moment. We did just review or get ready to review applications for this month. We are not seeing an increase in asks yet. I believe a significant factor in that is that no shutoffs are currently being done. I did speak with via email Debbie Staub, asking her if she could give us any forecasts so that we could look into the future, seeing that number be so low this month. She indicated they are still continuing to see those unpaid bills. They're encouraging people to make payments on a regular basis so that they stay caught up, but not in the same way that they typically would. So I think the answer is we don't know the full impact yet and probably won't until we start to see those shut-off notices go back into effect.
Thank you.
The amounts that we are getting seem to be anecdotally a little higher than what we would typically see. I'm guessing that that's people waiting a little longer to make those requests.
Thanks.
Councilmember Brown?
New computer, remember? I think my comment on, and it kind of like all goes together, so I just want to throw this in the back of your minds. Amanda, I know that I'm using I hate to say it, a lot more water than I was before because the pools aren't open. My kids can't get out and, get cooled down or anything. So we're actually, I know I'm probably a bad offender, but I got to have the slip and slide going. I've got to have this going. I have to have that going. And I'm worried. I know I can make my water bill. All right, wherever Jason is, so he doesn't turn my water off. But I am worried about our residents, and I'm worried about those water bills going up because I'm seeing more and more. One of the great things about COVID is that it brought communities together or neighborhoods together. But I am seeing a whole lot more. I think we had the slip and slide going in our yard on Sunday. The people across the street had the pool up on Sunday, and I'm not going to tell you what else we did. But we're using significantly more water than we were previously. I think that not only will the Northglenn Foundation see an increase in the bills, I think that we should think about our residents too, but I'm just throwing that out there because those bills are going to go up. And yes, I love my pool. I got the one big enough for me to sit in when the 3 rings are filled up.
Do we have any other comments on this topic? Councilmember Goff?
I just want to make sure this is a clarifying question that we're talking about the first column, which is the grant to Community Foundation only, or are we talking about all of them?
Sorry, so this slide was a little confusing. I wanted to capture, so the 3 columns, I wanted to capture the ideas that council had, but we didn't allocate any specific cost to any of them because we wanted it to be a larger community organization pot. So this pot of money, I think Mayor Pro Tem had suggested $500,000. So this $500,000 pot of money is open to any community organization, not necessarily just community foundation.
Okay, so the Meals on Wheels, and then this small grant program for the schools, it's all included, or is it just, okay.
Yeah, so it's all included. And it's not just those 3 columns, it's any other community organization that
Gotcha.
is eligible and wanted to apply for whatever pot of money council allocates.
Okay, thank you.
So I support increasing it to 500,000 and having it all encompassed. And I think outside agency is a good organization to help filter that and to take the grants. They do have a nice process that's easy to use. So I'm sorry, Ashley, you had your hand up.
Oh, no problem. Thank you, Mayor. I just wanted to say, I would definitely support increasing the amount to 500,000, but I think we kind of need to define what we'd be using it for a little more, because I know Corey in his memo, he pretty much said we can't give money to the food banks. And so looking at this list, it's like maybe the only thing that the money could go to is the community foundation. So I would definitely support increasing the amount and maybe coming up with more ideas of how the community organizations can benefit from that, because I don't know that we can actually throw money at the farther 2 columns based on Corey's memo, but I'm not entirely sure. And I'm also fine with the outside agency funding committee reviewing the applications, unless there's anybody else who's really, feeling strongly about it and would like to do it, but I'm fine with that.
Corey, do you want to speak to that?
Again, it's the same analysis. And I think I said it in the memo. The city would have to show that there was an increased demand directly related to the public health crisis, and covering the cost difference pre and post COVID. So it's not impossible, but the recipients would need to show that need and that it is COVID related.
So what are our next steps on this one?
Mayor, what I would recommend is if council wants to seek consensus on the amount. So what we've heard is $100,000 is too low. It's been recommended $500,000. And then staff can put together an application and bring that forward for council to review. And to Corey's point, it would be up to the organizations to demonstrate what the impact has been. And so we'd do a call for applications and set up a timeline and provide those specifics at an upcoming council meeting.
Heather, would it be necessary? I mean, if we just hand this over to the outside agency funding committee, why would we need to see the application?
That's an interesting thought. That's certainly something council can do.
We could just give it to the committee. I guess what I heard Ashley ask is if we could flesh out the other ideas, because it says small nonprofit grant programs like this or this, but then those depend. So if staff could flesh out what Meals on Wheels would have to do to qualify, what food banks would have to do to qualify, what the schools would have to do to qualify. And if it's something that's reasonable, then we would want to have $500,000 available. But if we find out that all of those where it says CARES Act eligible depends, if that shrinks it down to such tight restrictions that we're not really giving money away, then we won't need 500,000. Mm-hmm. So can we get more specifics? I mean, we could underspend, I guess. I don't know.
So we'll make an effort to try to do that. I mean, I think, Corey, I don't know if you want to interject here. I mean, we can internally come up with thoughts and then run it past Corey and see what he thinks. honor that request and suggestion that you just made, Mayor.
And I guess the only thing I would add is we're trying to react to the council's wish list. And, you know, we don't know which organizations might have the need, might have sort of the clientele based on COVID. So whether it's Meals on Wheels, whether it's other, whether it's the Northglenn Community Foundation or whether it's nonprofits we don't know about, it's hard to predict until we know really who's serving the community right now. And if we get those requests, and I think the outside agency funding is a good mechanism, then we can evaluate how they are providing services, how those services have been impacted by COVID, so we can identify the cost differential and their eligibility.
So I know that agency does a lot of work, and Joanna does a great job facilitating that. And so, I mean, I could see us putting a max on it, because I think you're right, Corey. As soon as if we put out the offer of money, we're going to get more applications. Outside agency came to council last year for more money, and we didn't get as much as we wanted, but we got a little bit. And it was really important because there was so much need. So, I mean, I'm okay with whatever number council wants to put up there. But I think if we let outside agency run it like they typically do, use the process they have, I think they'll have a lot of applications. Councilmember Mullica.
Yeah, I just wanted to say I support the 500,000 increase, and then I also agree with you. I think outside agency has the process in place to really evaluate, and with the help from staff, we'll be able to figure out the best way to give this money to the community. So I support that.
Okay. Anybody not okay with the 500,000? Okay, Heather, is that helpful?
It is.
Awesome. Okay.
So
there you go.
So this is our last category, support for residents. And this one is our not so fun one because of all the red X's. And to Councilmember Mullica's point, this is our smallest funded category because a lot of things that we can't directly do to residents or for residents and providing direct assistance is something that perhaps the community organizations will be able to provide. So emergency, utility, financial assistance, and grant program for rent and mortgage. So those are two things that Corey can further explain if anybody's still confused as to why we as a city can't provide direct assistance to a household. For the grant program for rent and mortgage, we could consider funding for nonprofits like Maker Housing or similar organizations that already provide this assistance. And we can do that through the community organization pot of money. So the scholarships for rec programs and childcare, since we haven't in particular touched on that, Corey, if you wanted to mention a few words about why it's not CARES Act eligible and why there's a depends in the constitutional category.
Yeah, I mean, this is another example of direct payments that may be contemplated by the CARES Act, but simply are the Constitution doesn't necessarily identify this as. I mean, there's risk, and one of the difficulties I've in going through this is it's not black and white. The public purpose doctrine may shift slightly when something like a global pandemic occurs. So a lot of this is based on what the existing case law identifies, and some of this, frankly, is the best guess because case law is never contemplated a global pandemic when it's looking at the public purpose doctrine. So a lot of these, both yellow stars and red X's are based on best guidance.
So with the scholarships for rec programs, including childcare, so that's not something that's CARES Act eligible, but to Corey's point, it's never been challenged before on whether or not it's constitutional or not, but if that's something that council wants to do to augment any existing scholarship programs that we have, that would come out of general fund money. And the estimated cost, we're not really sure because it just depends on what it's going to look like with state guidelines on how we can open up rec programs again. For the community resource navigator, so we estimated a $35,000 cost for a temporary new hire if needed. So for this, just to start it off, it's something that I could run, but then depending on the demand, we could potentially look at hiring a temporary person, maybe 20 hours a week. And then we imagine that temporary staffer as well, being able to help with the city help wagon. And that's not something that we anticipate a huge amount of cost to that, since if it's something like delivering medicine or groceries, we wouldn't be paying for the groceries. We would just have somebody, either a volunteer or the community resource navigator, deliver those to the resident that's in need. But that staff payroll expense, that could be eligible under CARES Act funding. But that's why there's that minimal cost. So if there's any questions, I'll be happy to answer them.
I had a question about staffing, Heather, because I don't want to add this to Rupa's plate. Is there another staff member that's possibly not working on an existing summer program that could be reallocated to this task?
We've already asked that question internally, and because of what we've done in shifting focus to childcare, etc., there's not right now. So, I can go back to directors and ask them to get creative, but at this point, think of this position as a seasonal position. So it would be fairly easy to hire someone for 20 hours a week, like Rupa suggested, and she would supervise that individual and provide the guidance. It would be easier to reallocate a staff member, given if they had the knowledge of the community. But like I said, we've already asked that question internally, and we've got staff time reallocated in a few different areas. So we weren't able to use someone from Parks and Recreation because that would be a natural fit.
My wondering, Heather, and I'm really curious to see if Jenny agrees. This is one of my favorite ideas. I think it's such a huge value add to the city services. My thinking is that it will ultimately not be a temporary position, that we will find it as a future need that is an ongoing need to support our residents. So just to throw that out there. Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I completely agree with your feelings on the matter around this may not be just a temporary position. I really do see this as something that we can continue to assess, whether it's, this position's value. But, I think about some of the conversations we've had regarding homelessness and our interest as a city and providing more warm handoffs to our residents and not just giving them a list of phone numbers to call and figure it out themselves. The other thing I wanted to share is that I really, I think that, it's easy to think that this is an entry-level position. I think it's easy to think about $35,000 as a starting salary, for someone to just figure it out. But the reality is the person, if this is funded, the person that needs to be fulfilling this role potentially is either a social worker or has, a human services background. And so I don't want us to undervalue that skill set or that level of expertise. And I also think developing a program, managing a caseload, and then making necessary connections to community organizations in order to be able to effectively, fill this role of helping the community navigate their particular situation is more than a 20-hour-a-week job. So I just want us to be realistic with this role, knowing that we do have the CARES funding in order to be able to, fund this potentially through the rest of the year as really a pilot program and how we help our community. But I really want staff and council to think bigger about what this could be.
So what I'm hearing now is much broader and bigger. So we can certainly go that direction. I just want to make sure council provides me with consensus to do that. So we love the idea, and we were starting, I hate to use the word small because that's not to undermine the importance of it, but I would say it was of a scale that this would be for the COVID-19 response. But if council is supportive of doing somewhat more along the lines of a pilot program, then we can reassess the salary, we can reassess the qualifications that we would need to hire for. But knowing that doing this pilot approach, I like the thought with wrapping in the homelessness piece to it. We haven't had that conversation yet because homelessness task force is on hold right now, but we can go down the path of a pilot. I just want to make sure that council's supportive of that, and that, again, to fund it, all things need to be tied back to COVID-19.
And Mayor, if I can respond to that, thank you. And part of the reason I brought up homelessness, that was, primarily an example, knowing that COVID has had so many different impacts that looks very different for each of our residents, right? In the event that someone has lost their job or lost their health insurance and has to make a difficult decision between paying their rent or paying for their medication, they may be experiencing homelessness, and it may be because of COVID. So I don't want us just to, try to make an assumption about how COVID is impacting everybody. The idea of this community navigator is really to help an individual who is experiencing hardship as a result of COVID navigate that situation and get the access to resources that they need in order to weather this storm and come out stronger, more resilient than they did previously. And I think it's also to ensure that our residents who are impacted by COVID can stay in our Northglenn community.
Councilmember Downing.
Let's see here. I understand the need for the community navigator, but I just am hearkening back to the conversation we had a little bit ago about possibly furloughing people. And I would be reluctant even to bring in a part-time person if we are considering furloughing some of our employees. I'm just really concerned about that. I mean, Jason was very articulate about the fact that he was trying to, let's see, how do I put this? Yeah, for the payroll or the paycheck protection. And even though we have money in the reserves, I have a hard time digesting the fact that we hire someone when we have not hired any part-time to fulfill some of the needs that we have in the city right now. And then there is a possibility of furloughing. And so I'm just very concerned about that. I think in the future, it's a conversation we can have, and it's a good one. But I'm just worried right now that I wouldn't want to furlough someone and have hired someone else to do something like this.
Councilmember Brown.
Okay, I want to clarify something, because we haven't furloughed anybody. We haven't talked about furloughing anybody. So I know that I got a little bit of a drama going on in the background. Did I miss something? Because we're at we're projected to be at 78% reserve by the end of the year. And we haven't talked about furloughing anybody. Am I correct?
So, and permit me, please, but I mean, you may have already left, but Jason was indicating the fact that there's a possibility, of furloughing. We were talking about that 900,000 and how it would be utilized. And if we didn't use it for the CARES Act and doing the child leave and that type of thing, then there's a possibility that money would have to come from the reserves. And then with the reserves going down, there might be a possibility, and I maybe have interpreted this wrong, there might be a possibility then of furloughing people if we didn't use that money the way it was discussed. So, I mean, that's what I interpreted,
Heather, I'm going to ask that you speak to this, because I don't want anything to come out tomorrow to our employees or anything that we were talking about furloughing them on this call, or possibility of furloughs throughout the year. So I'd like some clarification on that before we move forward.
Right. So a couple pieces. I've not brought any recommendation forward to council for furloughs. Furlough is a type of it's a way to create budget savings that other organizations are using. The part-time, non-benefited positions that are currently not being paid through the rec center, that group of employees has been impacted, but not furloughed. So I have not brought anything forward to council and asked for approval on furloughs. I think there's a couple of things at play to take a step back and think about the big picture. We will be bringing forward the third discussion about our economic road to recovery on June 15th. At that session, Jason will have had an opportunity to analyze and look at April sales and use tax revenues and use that data to inform what we project May to look like. So we have March. He presented that information on what half a month of impact looks like for March, and then how he did an initial projection through year end. So we're going to update that information. Council directed me to identify savings. And we have done that through reductions by not touching personnel, but by reducing expenditures and supplies, professional services, putting certain 2020 strategic planning goals on hold. And so now what we need to do is look at where we are financially and look towards 2021 budget process.
Right.
So there's a few moving pieces to that, and we have to take it piece by piece. So I don't want the organization to be in a position where we're furloughing employees, but right. 2021 budget is going to look different depending on what the decrease looks like for April. Is it going to be a 30% decrease, a 40% decrease, a 50% decrease in sales and use tax revenue? We will know soon and bring that forward to council to inform what decisions we have to make in terms of what reductions we made to date, what use of fund balance reserve council's comfortable using. Because quite frankly, I've heard a couple different things from council. I've heard we want to use reserve. I've heard we don't want to use reserve. So my goal on June 15th, and Jason and I have talked about this, is we need to get clearer consensus from council on, okay, we're at this point in the year based on the impact for April, so we can make an informed projection on what May is going to look like. And here's how we need to move forward with any additional actions that we need to take in order. So right now I'm towing the line and trying to provide that stability in the organization, not impact personnel, and not impact level of service. And it's getting tougher to do that. So I'm hopeful that on June 15th, we have a clearer picture to present to council. And that way we can really wrap our heads around what does budget 2021 look like in terms of it, a balanced budget. But we're going to make some assumption that there's going to be a revenue decrease because this isn't going to end within 6 months. It's going to have a prolonged impact. And I think we're all in agreement with that. So I know that was a long explanation, but hopefully that's helpful. But no, I don't want employees thinking that furloughs are on the table because that's not consistent with the messaging that I've provided to them.
Thank you very much, Heather.
So I don't know if that explanation changes your thinking, Joyce, on your position for that navigator position.
Not right now.
Okay. Antonio?
Thank you, Mayor. On this navigator position, we're looking at $35,000 from CARES money, right?
Yes.
Okay, and we didn't spend, but we were in support of $500,000 for something we don't really know much about. So I'm a little confused as to why we can't come up with $35,000 of CARES money, but we can come up with $500,000 of CARES money. And we know what the navigator will produce, but we don't know what that $500,000 community money would produce. So I'm a little confused myself. I think Jenny's idea is a good idea. Now, whether or not that turns into a full-time position after the COVID-19 is over or whatever it turns out to be, that's a conversation for another day. But right now we're talking about COVID money. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. That's all I have.
So just one comment for me. I think when the conversation evolved around the fact that it would probably, because of the need, that it would probably move into a full-time position, that's what caught me. It wasn't the part-time, it wasn't the CARES money. It was, what we're going to be doing later on with the budget.
And that's fair. I was forecasting, I think that what will happen is as a community, we will see how important this position is, and then we will probably advocate for it. If not, then my bigger concern is that if we talk too much about it, it's going to be completely pointless because we're going to have moved past the season where our community needs it. And so if we spend too much time spinning on it and not implementing it, then it's just a wasted topic. So I would say if we're going to do it, we need to get on it tomorrow in order for it to have value to our community. Any other thoughts? Councilmember Witkovich?
Thank you. I'll just add that I support the position and spending the $35,000 on it.
So to Antonio's point, at some point, have we added up all of this to figure out how much we have left, or if we're over, or if we're, is that coming?
Track. So Rupa, go ahead. Sorry. No, you
all right. So on the next slide, I've made well, I guess you can't see the edits, but so that top number, so the internal city expenses, that number is adjusted to $175,000. If you take out the $900,000 thing that council said to take off, and then support for community organizations went from $100,000 to $500,000. And so the overall investment impact is $2,021,400. So available funds for allocation that is left is $978,000. And that's not adjusting the $35,000 for the community resource navigator. So what we have left is $978,600. And if you go to the next slide, you can see the items that are to be determined.
What do you mean to be determined? Some of them are in there.
So the very bottom, so the small business grant program round 2, that's something, yeah, the council has to determine. You know what, actually, now that I think about this, with the $850,000 Elevate Small Business Program, so the number that I gave you on the previous slide that we have left of $978,600, I don't think that includes the $850,000.
Isn't that included as support for small businesses?
No, because we had that as to be determined. So that the categories 1 through 6 with the dollar amounts on the previous slide, that's specific to the ideas that you all had come up with as council. And the Elevate Small Business Program of the $850,000 is what you guys had already allocated.
So because of the change, this is now $978,600,
correct?
But minus $850 because you didn't calculate it in.
Correct. So of that $850,000 though, there's about $428,000 left as of right now in the Elevate Small Business Grant Program that you guys could choose to allocate to round 2 if that money is not used up by June 30th.
Okay. Well, what are our next steps? I feel like I need a new spreadsheet with updated numbers that are
we'll get you
updated
numbers. Mayor, don't worry about that. We'll send that out tomorrow. So expect an email from me with updated numbers based on the direction that we've received today. So
well, the other question I have is on some of them that had a range. So like where it says public health, is the 181, is that the 20,000 or the 111,000? Like that was that item that had a huge range to it.
Yeah, so the 20,000 amount is if we're able to buy those hand sanitizer dispensers ourselves and do the refills. The $111,800 is if we got a vendor to rent those dispensers from, and then they would do the maintenance for it. So,
no, I remember that. I remember that from the conversation, but I'm just saying mathematically, what number was used? Was it the top number?
Yeah, it was 111,800.
Okay. So based on our discussion tonight, and because I don't know that we landed on a decision other than the fact that the hand washing machines weren't in stock, and it didn't sound like we were recommending that. It sounded like we were recommending the lower end. So based on the conversations, section by section, can you guys get us an updated kind of bid sheet?
Yes, I mean, generally speaking, I can tell you comfortably tonight that you have about $1 million, just over $1 million that has not been allocated. So based on the direction tonight, yeah, but I'll give you the breakdown.
I'm like, that seems high, but okay.
No, it's not, because it's the back and forth, but I know we're not showing that to you visually right now. So I'll provide it in an email tomorrow. Jason just confirmed that with me. So in a text message. So he's doing some math, and it'll be easier if we just do a clean sweep tomorrow based on all the direction council provided, and I'll send you an email with updated figures by the area.
Okay.
So in terms of answering your question about next steps, I think we have direction from council to move forward based on the different pieces we talked about. We'll be bringing the phase 2 discussion to council. I believe that's June 22nd. Is that correct, Rupa, or did I get that wrong?
June 15th.
June 15th, okay. Thought it sounded wrong. Thank you for clarifying that. And then we'll also provide any additional feedback that we get from the community to council. And then you can let us know if there's any additional direction in terms of how you want to move forward. But this won't be the last discussion you have about community investments, because it'll be an ongoing discussion. But I think after tonight, we'll focus on getting several of these items implemented and then reporting back and letting you know how it's going, and continue moving forward with other pieces as directed by council.
Okay. Any other questions? I mean, I think the only one I'm worried about is that navigator position, that would need to be something that we move on more quickly. And then if that requires like really designing a robust position as opposed to just saying, hey, Rupa, try to fit it into your day. I just worry about that for two reasons, because she has a full plate on her own. And I appreciated Jenny's input as far as what qualifications would be really helpful to have in that position. So do you have thoughts on that? And can I ask really quickly, kind of side note, are we hiring an HR director?
We are. The recruitment is open, and then I have about 9.5 FTEs that I'm holding that we're not yet hiring until we get through really seeing what the budget impact for April looks like. So I didn't think it was prudent financially to move forward with hiring those positions, but that's part of that tension in terms of holding the line, where there's certain staff members that are doing more, which we can do that temporarily and maintain level of service, but there's certain areas where we're going to have to reevaluate. So I think my thought with this community navigator position is, when we originally talked about it, I thought I heard a smaller scale. And again, I'm not saying that to diminish the value of the position. So if council wants to provide me with direction to do something that's more of an expanded scope, I can tell you I'm not going to be able to hire someone with a social services, human services background. And I would say that maybe we need to have an additional conversation, not to further delay this position, but we also have a human services department within Adams County. And so this position I view is really intended to complement existing positions within Adams County, that, you know, this position is going to connect individuals to those individuals within Adams County that are the experts within their respective services, such as food insecurity, as well as other areas. So I think this would be in an ideal position for someone who has a facilitation coordination background. And so we'll move forward and make the effort. If we're unable to hire someone, then we'll have to go back to the drawing board. But I would not. My assumption is this is a temporary position for now, and that we would evaluate whether or not it would be a full-time position moving forward based on our assessment. And honestly, I think it's only prudent to have council look at what it could be permanently in a full-time capacity. If there's a need for full-time, I don't know that I would recommend that. It could warrant 0.5 FTE. It could warrant a 0.75 FTE. I would want to have that discussion during the 2021 budget process, because so many things are going to be on the table during the 2021 budget process that I think it's only right to have the discussion at that point.
So I see Councilmember Esquivel and then Mayor Pro Tem.
Yeah, I just wanted to inject that UCD and USC and CU all have social work programs. And I'm sure that social workers have graduated and looking for a job. This would be an opportunity to contact the director of the social work department in those universities and see what kind of leads we can get. You know, let's hire the youngest and the brightest and see where that goes. Thank you.
Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I completely love what you just shared, Councilmember Esquivel, and I think it's really smart. I also think it's spot on in that, you know, having worked in human services, you know, in the past, I think it's really critically important that we have somebody who understands human services, who, you know, has training on providing trauma-informed support, who's able to, you know, interact with folks and understand, you know, de-escalation and understands case management. I mean, this to me is not, you know, this position, if we truly want it to be successful, if we truly want to ensure that we're providing the best service to our residents to help them get through this difficult time, really needs to be somebody who has experiences in the human services field. This is not an entry position that's only, you know, doing facilitation and calling up Adams County for support. This is somebody who is, you know, legitimately assessing the needs of one of our residents and making those connections to other community service providers, whether that's, you know, an organization that can help with food insecurity or an organization that can help with domestic violence services. Like, this to me is so much more than just talking to Adams County. And I don't want us to set the bar too low before we truly realize the potential that this navigator position can have in helping our residents navigate COVID.
Well, I think that's a big ask, and that's a big position. I think it sounds amazing. One thing I think about is Title I schools all have a position called the parent liaison, and those people are invaluable to the community and how they support parents in navigating school, in navigating their community. But they don't always have all of those degrees or connections, but the point is, I think there's plenty of people out there. I think we just need to figure out how to get a job description pulled together and how to find the right person. But it sounds like we're not totally clear on what the job description looks like. And so maybe we can look around and talk to other organizations and talk to other either municipalities, or that parent liaison position is really close on a micro scale. And so, you know, maybe looking at what are those job titles, tasks, what are the expectations before we figure out how to move forward. But once again, I just fear that if we spin on it too much, it won't get done, and then it'll just be a wasted idea. So it would be awesome if we had an HR director to do all of those things for you. I just know that we added that task or that request to your plate. If we had someone in place, they could do that for you. So.
Absolutely. So what I will do is I will pull together a job description after doing some outreach and trying to get a better feel for what's out there. If it's okay with council, what I'll do is I'll advise you via email if the amount, if I need to go higher than $35,000, and just say, this is what the market looks like. This is what I need to do to hire the right person for this temporary assignment. Sometimes we call that a time limited. So don't think of temporary as of less value of any sort, but we'll call it a time limited position to assist with the COVID-19. We will manage what this individual is doing in terms of use of metrics, and then get a feel for the conversation that we'll have as part of 2021 budget. Is council comfortable with that? So that way we can move on this. And it's something that we're creating. Consider it a design build versus me giving you the construction drawings right here and now.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Any other final thoughts? Rupa, do you have any closing comments for us tonight?
I don't. I think we got some good feedback from council, so appreciate it. Good conversation.
Okay. Are there any other items for council? Nope. All right. Hearing none, we are adjourned. Good night, everybody.